Chapter 633. Los Angeles. In a simple office in the studio of Firefly Studios. Cindy Crawford felt that she was just asking for trouble. Her agent, Jeremy, was carefully reading the same endorsement contract as Linda Evangelista and Christy Durrington. The annoying man opposite her, who seemed to have nothing to do, was looking at her with interest. If his eyes were filled with infatuation, desire, and even undisguised desire, she wouldn't feel anything. She might even be a little proud. However, this man's eyes didn't look like he was looking at a beauty at all. It was more like he was admiring a beautiful pet. The office door was gently knocked. After getting permission, a staff member brought in Cindy Crawford's clothes. Cindy Crawford didn't want to find a room to change out of her underwear. She directly put on the black dress in the office. She was finally relieved. She sat back on the chair and stared at Eric with a little dissatisfaction. Eric smiled faintly and said softly, "You're prettier in clothes." "Mr. Williams," Cindy Crawford finally couldn't help but retort, "are you talking about a Barbie doll?" Eric shook his head and said, "Of course not, you're much prettier than a Barbie doll." "Oh, but I know a girl who looks just like a real Barbie. People can't help but want to pinch her little face when they see her." Cindy Crawford noticed that Eric suddenly revealed a gentle and even doting smile when he said those words. A trace of jealousy appeared in her heart. How could this despicable guy be so engrossed in thinking about other women in front of a beauty like her? And with such a gentle expression on his face, it was simply unreasonable. Thinking of the recent situation, the anger and grievance in Cindy Crawford's heart surged out again. After hesitating for a moment, she finally couldn't help but reveal a resentful and weak expression as she said, "Mr. Williams, I'm already 28 years old this year." Eric wasn't stingy with the compliments unique to Westerners. He said, "Compared to other supermodels, you're really well maintained. I believe you'll still be so beautiful 10 years later." Although she didn't hear much sincerity from Eric's tone, Cindy Crawford still felt a lot better. However, her tone became more bitter. "But as a model, after 30 years old, I can't compete with the new generation. I spent half a year to get a chance in Hollywood, just to continue my career. Why do you have to make things difficult for a little woman like me?" Eric smiled and said, "Do you also think I deliberately ruined your role?" Cindy Crawford didn't answer, but she gave him a look that said, "Isn't it?" Eric said, "This matter has something to do with me, but I didn't ruin your role. Instead, there's a problem with the movie project. Moreover, if everything goes according to the established trajectory, that film will be your starting point in Hollywood, and also your ending point." Cindy Crawford thought of Joe Silvo's gloomy face that night and immediately understood Eric's words. However, she quickly found another loophole and said, "The role that originally belonged to me fell into Claudia Schiffer's hands. How do you explain this? Aren't you worried that this film will become Claudia Schiffer's Hollywood terminal? This is an unexpected situation. Joe Silvo wanted to use Claudia to get me involved." Eric didn't deny his relationship with Claudia at all. He said, "I didn't know about it beforehand, and I didn't plan to interfere afterwards. As for the impact, it's only for you. Not to mention that Joe Silvo will definitely make adjustments to the project, even if Claudia screws up. Do you think I'll let her be affected?" Cindy Crawford felt a sense of powerlessness in her heart. She moved her lips but didn't say anything. Jeremy, who had been secretly listening by the side, finally breathed a sigh of relief. He was a little glad that Eric didn't mind Cindy Crawford's little provocation. He also understood that Cindy Crawford's role in the whole matter was a little bug that was accidentally stepped to death by a passerby. Cindy Crawford's accusation of Eric was like a little bug's relative overreaching and accusing a passerby of murder. Not only would it not attract the attention of the passerby, but it would also make people feel ridiculous and ridiculous. When the two of them quieted down, Jeremy was about to do his duty as an agent to discuss the contract with Eric. However, when he thought of what had just happened, he suddenly felt that it might be more appropriate for Cindy Crawford to speak up herself. A beautiful woman would always be more lenient. Although Cindy Crawford's public popularity was higher than Linda Evangelista and Christy Durrington's, Jeremy wasn't dissatisfied with being treated the same as the other two in the contract. He just pushed the contract in front of Cindy Crawford and pointed to a clause that he felt needed to negotiate. When Eric saw the two of them gesturing, he took the initiative to say, "If you want to discuss it in private, I can step away." "No need." Cindy Crawford quickly raised her head and said to Eric, "Mr. Williams, we have no objections to this contract. However, isn't a 5-year contract a little too long?" Eric said, "If you think it's too long, we can sign a 2-year contract." Cindy Crawford and Jeremy looked at each other. The two of them almost thought that they had misheard. Isn't he too easy to negotiate with? However, Eric didn't let them down. He quickly said, "However, before making a decision, you can take a look at the contract. It should be page 7. I don't remember which clause it is. The contract states that Party A will use its media resources to assist its spokespersons to increase their personal popularity and public influence. However, if you don't want to sign a 5-year contract, LTD and Firefly can't invest too much resources in you. Not only that, but we will also train your successor from now on and pour the media resources that originally belonged to you into her. When your contract expires, that girl can directly replace you." In fact, the channels for models to establish and maintain their fame were very narrow. In addition to those unconventional scandals with movie stars, singers, or sports stars, the more orthodox way was to continuously appear on magazine covers. Therefore, people would always see the introduction of some supermodels that had appeared on the cover of many well-known magazines. Jeremy also noticed the contract that Eric mentioned just now, but because this clause was too general and didn't give any specific promises at all, he didn't pay attention to it. At this time, when they heard Eric mention the inherent relationship between this clause and the 5-year contract, the two of them suddenly realized the value of this seemingly insignificant contract. Firefly was a huge media group that was involved in all kinds of mainstream media, such as movies and TV, and its media resources were absolutely incomparable to those of print media. For example, if one could get the opportunity to be the heroine of a movie under Firefly, the influence would be absolutely no less than that of appearing on 100 magazines. And the more famous a model was, the more endorsement fees they would receive from companies. In the contract that Eric gave, although it stipulated that endorsement work related to Victoria's Secret must be the first priority at all times, it didn't prohibit them from accepting endorsement contracts for other products, except for the internal brands in the same industry. Therefore, if Firefly gave them media resources according to the contract, Cindy Crawford believed that her future endorsement value would definitely be much higher than before. Although she was already tempted, Cindy Crawford was smart enough to ask, "Mr. Williams, about this clause, can you be more specific?" More specifically, for example, movie roles, guest appearances in TV dramas, talk show guest invitations, interviews with traditional print media, online media publicity, and so on. Even if you write a book on beauty and maintenance, as long as it's not too bad, Firefly can help you contact the publishing and marketing companies for you. Because the popularity of the 5 main spokespersons in the future also means the exposure of Victoria's Secret brand, so you can rest assured that Firefly will never be stingy with these resources. After a pause, Eric looked at Cindy Crawford's beautiful face again and said, "In fact, there is a very good opportunity now. If it's not for the timing, I can recommend you to try the role of the 17th 007 Bond girl. Although the previous 007 Bond girls were all pretty faces, the role in this one is very different from the previous ones. It will definitely bring good fame to the actress." Eric was talking about the villain Bond girl played by Famke Janssen in GoldenEye in his previous life. The wildness, arrogance, bloodthirstiness, and madness of the Russian female agent left a very deep impression on the audience. It also opened Famke Janssen's Hollywood scene. Compared to the unlucky Vase character in Competitive Game, this villain Bond girl was definitely 100 times better. However, Famke Janssen had already started filming the 5th X-Files, and couldn't squeeze out any time. Eric could only let MGM choose the right candidate. Cindy Crawford was just about to try to get Eric to specify these promises in the contract, but when she heard his last sentence, her eyes suddenly lit up. She said, "Mr. Williams, I can prepare for the show while acting. You have just seen my walk. I believe I definitely don't need to undergo a long preparation training like those rookies, right?" As she spoke, the girl threw a flirtatious look at Eric. Eric shook his head unmoved. "No, You can only choose one. Then and you can only choose the first option. Cindy Crawford was stunned for a moment before she realized that she could only choose the former. Disappointment flashed in her eyes, but the girl still grumbled unwillingly, "Mr. Williams, you're really unreasonable." The girl's smooth flirtatious changes made Eric want to subdue the demon again. Why did he say again? Eric coughed and threw away these messy thoughts. He said, "If there are no other questions, I will contact Miss Emily Brighton. You can sign the contract tomorrow." Cindy Crawford still wanted to say something, but Eric waved his hand to stop her. "Miss Crawford, I know what you want to say. The clause about the media resources is indeed a bit general, but you should know that even if I remove this clause, not many supermodels will reject this contract. Although the endorsement fee of $10 million over 5 years is not the highest and the workload is a bit heavy, there are not many in the modeling industry who are worth more than this. As long as we can work well together, I will definitely not be stingy with the rewards." After Eric finished speaking, Cindy Crawford wisely chose to stop. She said, "Then, I have no more questions, Mr. Williams." "Okay, then let's talk about my requirements." Eric glanced at Cindy Crawford again and asked, "How much do you weigh now?" Cindy Crawford suddenly felt a little embarrassed. Because she had been busy entering Hollywood in the past 6 months, she was no longer as cautious about her body size as before. After hesitating for a moment, the girl answered honestly, 136 pounds. 136 pounds was equivalent to 61 kilograms. For Cindy Crawford, who was nearly 1.8 meters tall, it was not considered overweight at all. However, Eric remembered Cindy Crawford's figure when she just put on her underwear. He shook his head and said, "In 2 months, I want to see a beautiful vestline. Is that okay?" Cindy Crawford thought to herself, "Can I say no?" But this thought only turned in her mind. She flirtatiously changed her posture to show off her curves and said teasingly, "Of course, Mr. Williams. But I already have a vestline. Maybe you didn't notice it just now." Eric smiled and nodded. "It's okay. There will definitely be another chance next time." Of course, Eric understood the hint in the girl's tone. It was just that he was more used to hunting than being the prey. Cindy Crawford realized that her obvious hint did not make Eric take the initiative to invite her to a date. She awkwardly said a few more polite words and agreed on a time to sign the contract. Then, she left with her agent. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Kelly Haynes pushed open the door and walked into Eric's office in the studio. She found that there was a black piano in the room. Sitting beside the piano, Eric was playing an unfamiliar song. Although the notes under Eric's fingertips were a little choppy, the sad and languid melody still had a lingering influence. It made people unconsciously feel a sense of despair that almost made them cry. Kelly, who was holding a few thick documents, leaned against the door in a daze. She looked at the back of the focused figure in a daze. "You are already so outstanding, so dazzling, and so powerful. What else can make you feel so lonely?" The piano suddenly stopped. Eric picked up a pencil and was about to add something to the unfinished score when he felt the presence behind him. He turned around and saw Kelly standing there with tears in her eyes. Her expression was full of motherly pity. Eric quickly got up and went to Kelly's side. He took the thick stack of documents and threw them aside. He hugged the woman in his arms and said gently, "Why are you crying?" Kelly, who was in Eric's arms, suddenly felt shy like a little girl. She shook her head and said softly, "No, I brought the report you wanted and a letter from Mr. Buffett." Eric recalled Kelly's expression and suddenly smiled. "You've been here for a while, haven't you?" Kelly nodded and said, "I knocked on the door, but you didn't hear me." Eric more or less understood what was going on. He shook his head and said, "It seems that I really failed." Kelly did not understand what Eric was talking about. Eric had already taken her little hand and sat down on the bench beside the piano. He said, "Come and see the new song I wrote. Do you know how to play the piano?" "Yes." Kelly nodded. She took the score that Eric had only completed a small part of it and scanned it. Her delicate fingers could not help but place on the piano keys. The tune from just now started playing again without any hindrance. Eric could instantly tell that Kelly's piano skills were definitely 10 streets ahead of his. He said, "If I had known, I would have asked you to come over. I wouldn't have had to write so painfully." Kelly picked up the pencil and corrected a few small errors in Eric's score. She asked softly, "Why did you write such a sad song? It's a background song for a big show. However, your reaction was not what I wanted. That's why I said that it was a failure just now." Eric's fingers gently slid across the piano keys. He said, "This song is not to express sadness, but the feeling of disillusionment after one's dream is shattered." In the story, a high-spirited young man chased after the illusory dream in his heart for half his life and became successful. When he suddenly looked back, he realized that things had changed. A luxurious life was not what he wanted. The girl back then was no longer the angel in his imagination. However, she did not want to wake up. Thus, she sank, and died in the vanity. Kelly looked at Eric's side profile in a daze and muttered, "The Great Gatsby?" "Yes." Eric smiled and leaned over. He kissed Kelly gently on the lips and said half-jokingly, "Can you not be so smart? This will give me a lot of pressure." Kelly's eyes were filled with infatuation and worship. She said, "Who can be as smart as you? I've studied piano for so many years, but I could never write such a song. Please don't worship me. It will make me feel like a liar. You have already cheated me of everything." Kelly blurted out in a daze, but then she regretted it. Her face was red and her eyes were evasive. She mumbled, "Then, what is the name of this song?" "In the Prime of Youth." Eric placed half of the score on the shelf and said, "Play it. I'll sing it for you." The slow melody sounded once again. Eric took a moment to prepare himself before singing softly. Although his slightly hoarse male voice couldn't compare to Lana Darren's innocence and desolation, it had a different kind of decadent air to it. Seen all the prosperity, experienced all the vicissitudes of life. My heart is tired. Indulged in a life of luxury, drinking from cup to cup, like smoke passing by. Midsummer night. End of July. We were young and frivolous, unafraid of the passing of time. We indulged in time, until the evening lights were lit. When the prime of youth is gone, my face is gone, will you love me as before, despite the long years? When the noise is gone, covered in wounds, will you love me as before, until the end of time? To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Mobile users, please read it at M. Chapter 634. After an unknown period of time, the office was still filled with an inexplicable, ambiguous atmosphere. Kelly Haynes sat across the desk in a demure manner, holding a pencil in her hand and supplementing Eric's score according to her memory. Occasionally, she would answer the questions of the man opposite her. Regarding Eric's discovery of Ron Perlman's purchase of Firefly's bonds in the Los Angeles Times in the morning, both Katzenberg and Chris from New York concluded that there was no need to worry. Buffett, who had the same opinion, even gave Eric a detailed handwritten letter in an attempt to reassure him. Due to the many precedents, it was not difficult to guess Ron Perlman's intentions. The Wolf of Wall Street probably wanted to take advantage of the turmoil caused by Firefly's internal reform of the animation department to unite with other creditors to enter Firefly's board of directors, obtain a position on the board of directors, and participate in the group's operations and management decisions. Looking at it from a long-term perspective, this was only the first step of Ron Perlman's plan. After successfully entering Firefly's board of directors, Ron Perlman only needed to wait for the moment when Firefly's operations were in trouble. Film and television media had always been a very risky industry. Although Hollywood had experienced 100 years of ups and downs, it was still the same few major film companies. But in fact, the owners of these film companies had changed countless times. Every time a film company faced bankruptcy because of a failure of a film, the original owner could voluntarily or be forced to transfer the company to the next company. After the completion of the bond issue, Firefly's accumulated debt would reach $10 billion. According to the various interest calculation formulas of different bonds, The total amount of repayment was estimated to be around $15 billion. Based on the average 10-year bond, Firefly's annual debt payment would be $1.5 billion. Of course, this was only theoretical data. Although it seemed like this number even exceeded Firefly's annual profit in the past few years. But in fact, based on Firefly's annual market value and revenue growth expectations, as well as the complicated tax reduction system, this expense would not be a burden to Firefly. But all of this had a premise, and that was Firefly's business performance had to be maintained in good condition. However, in the minds of all industry professionals, it was almost impossible for a media company with film and television as its core to maintain a stable performance level. Perhaps in the next 1 or 2 years, the failure of a few big-budget movies or TV series could cause Firefly Group's finances to be tight. Moreover, in the case of the locomotive lacking in power, the domino effect would also cause the downturn of other businesses and thus form a vicious cycle. Ron Perlman was waiting for that moment in the future. Once Firefly Group was in trouble, the creditors could use the excuse of protecting the safety of their own funds to propose a debt-to-equity swap request to the FTC and Firefly's board of directors. This way, the creditors would become the owners of Firefly Group. In the original spacetime, MGM, which was burdened with huge debts, was on the verge of being taken over by creditors more than once. In Buffett's handwritten letter, the sharp-eyed investment tycoon analyzed that Ron Perlman's plan to launch this attack was most likely to rely on the cooperation of Disney's hand-drawn animation department to put pressure on Firefly's shareholders. Buffett said that if he hadn't seen the information from that night, he would have judged that Eric would protect Disney's hand-drawn animation department at all costs because of the huge profits that Lion King was expected to generate. This could also be used as a bargaining chip by the creditors to blackmail Eric into joining the board of directors. However, since Eric already had sufficient reasons to reform Disney's animation department, Ron Perlman's bargaining chip was no longer valid from the beginning. Buffett also sincerely expressed that even if something else happened, Berkshire Hathaway would stand firmly on Eric's side and would provide the greatest amount of help. After reading the documents, Eric looked up at Kelly and asked, "Have you read Buffett's letter?" Kelly shook her head and asked, "What's wrong?" "Take a look first." Eric handed over Buffett's letter. Kelly quickly read the contents of the letter, thought for a moment, and said, "I don't think there's a problem. Buffett makes a lot of sense." "That's not what I'm talking about. Look at the last paragraph." Kelly read the last paragraph and frowned slightly. She thought for a moment and said, "Buffett promised that Berkshire Hathaway would stand firmly on Firefly's side. It doesn't seem to be a problem. I think it's a good thing. Based on Buffett's personality, don't you think this promise is a little too generous?" Kelly smiled and said, "Eric, you're too suspicious. I think Mr. Buffett is more likely to be interested in your ability and wants you to be Berkshire Hathaway's successor." Hee hee. Hearing Kelly's joke, Eric also laughed and didn't harp on this issue. After quickly reading all the documents again, Eric suddenly remembered that Peter Schneider stood him up this morning. He looked up and asked, "Did you see Peter Schneider at the high-level meeting today?" Kelly said, "No, shouldn't he and Roy Disney be on your side?" Eric frowned and quickly said, "Kelly, can you help me find out where the two of them are?" Kelly noticed that Eric's expression suddenly became serious and said, "Now?" "Yes, now, right away." Kelly nodded and took out her mobile phone and address book. She started to make calls. Eric picked up a pen and quickly wrote down information about Firefly Group, Disney's animation department, Ron Perlman, Chris, Buffett, David West, and so on a piece of draft paper. He also connected the relevant terms with the lines he often used, quickly forming a web. Eric quickly filled in the blank space in the middle of the web with another word. Not long after, Kelly put down the phone and said to Eric, "I can't get through to their personal phones. I only heard that Peter Schneider and Roy Disney went to New York. I don't know the details." When Eric heard New York, he basically understood. He said, "There's no need to check. They must have gone to see Ron Perlman." Kelly immediately thought of the reason why the two executives went to see Ron Perlman. She asked, "Then what do we do now?" Eric's smile became a little mysterious. He said, "This is a good time to pay them back." Kelly was a little confused. Eric continued, tomorrow is the premiere of Whimsical Beauty, right? Kelly recalled Eric's schedule and asked, "Didn't you say you weren't going to attend?" "I'm going. I have to go, and we'll all go together." Eric patted the table lightly and said, "The 3 old men in Los Angeles, and Chris in New York, let him fly over tomorrow. Oh, and Katzenberg and Michael Lynn." After thinking about it, Eric did not continue to add people. The people mentioned just now were all closely related to the Firefly Group and shared the same interests. Needless to say, Buffett and the other 2 were shareholders. Chris was absolutely trustworthy. Katzenberg was the next CEO of Firefly. If he could not be trusted, Eric did not need to continue playing in Hollywood. Finally, Michael Lynn was about to leave, but he was also a small shareholder of Firefly Group. As for the other executives, Eric temporarily dismissed the idea of telling them. After all, the fewer people who knew about something in his mind, the better. Oh, there seemed to be another insider. In the original article on the analysis of the 2D animation industry, Eric specifically asked different staff in the assistant office to collect different information. The final summary work was done by Kelly herself, so she was the only one who could proudly see the full picture of the chain of evidence. Moreover, whether it was Kelly's identity as Eric's first assistant or their current close relationship, Eric did not want to exclude her. Eric looked at Kelly Haynes in front of him and smiled. "You come with us tomorrow. After the movie we can talk." Kelly also realized at this time that tomorrow was definitely not as simple as just watching a movie. Something was definitely going to happen. However, Eric's unhesitant trust also made her feel warm in her heart. "Then I'll inform them first?" Eric shook his head and said, "I'll make these calls myself. You can help prepare a few invitations for the premiere. Also, don't forget to send a car to pick up Buffett and the others tomorrow." With Buffett, the 3 old men will definitely be reluctant to spend money. If they appear on the red carpet in a taxi, I can't afford to lose face. Okay. The Lion King experienced a record-breaking box office of more than $46 million in 3 days in the first weekend. The total box office of the first 7 days in the first week reached an astonishing high of $69 million. Correspondingly, the Western film Law Enforcement, which cost more than $63 million, only had a box office of a little more than $10 million in the first week. Warner's original big production with the purpose of sniping The Lion King not only failed to complete its mission, but also fell behind True Lies, Star Trek VII, and Saving Private Ryan, outside of The Lion King, completely becoming the cannon fodder of the hot summer season. In the face of a direct loss of more than $70 million, in order to account to shareholders, Warner implicated the director, producer, and several corresponding executives of Law Enforcement, becoming the second batch of unlucky people to be fired from Hollywood after Paramount's Beverly Hills Detective 3. Eric himself did not expect that before Future Waterworld, Kevin Costner had already experienced a silent failure. In this time and space, the first Mission Impossible had already entered post-production. Eric had watched the sample in detail. He was very satisfied with the shooting results of Kevin Costner's version of Ethan Hunt and Brian De Palma. Therefore, the only thing that Eric was worried about after Law Enforcement was whether Future Waterworld would fall through because of this. If this film did not work, then Flower Pictures would definitely have to face Kevin Costner's exorbitant demand for the sequel to Mission Impossible. The day before July, Eric secretly led the new version of Breakin' Hot Girls to hold a grand premiere in Los Angeles. After Rain Man in 1988, MGM had been silent for 6 consecutive years. During this period, they released no more than 10 films in most of the years, and none of them broke the $100 million box office. After many twists and turns, the 2 new MGM CEO Frank Marcheso and President John Kerry's plan to complete the company's recovery by releasing Bear Peak of the Mountain and The Last Phantom Hero last year also failed. Now, DreamWorks Productions' 10-film production plan and United Artists' relaunch of the 007 series had become MGM's last stand. Once they failed again, MGM's only way out was bankruptcy liquidation, and the company's assets would be auctioned off to repay the huge debt of more than $1 billion. The 75% shares of MGM held by the French bank Credit Lyonnais would become a pile of waste paper. Compared to MGM's executives, Credit Lyonnais, and DreamWorks Productions' European shareholders who were nervous, worried, and expectant, Eric's mood was more relaxed. For this film, Eric had put in a lot of effort. From the script to the actors, from the director to the producer, everything was decided by Eric based on his memory. His involvement in the film's production progress and final editing was also far more than other films. From the several test screenings of Breakin' Hot Girls, the filmmakers and the general audience who participated in the test screenings gave enough positive comments. If this film failed again, it could only be said that God didn't bless MGM. As for Eric himself, since his rebirth, he had experienced so much glory. Although he didn't change so much that he started to look forward to failure, he was definitely not afraid of failure. Although he didn't plan to attend the premiere, since he changed his mind and appeared at the scene, Eric did his due diligence. He was interviewed by the reporters on the red carpet, and he deliberately called the three girls to his side for a series of photos to satisfy the gossip of the live media. When the three old men came out of a luxurious limousine at the end of the red carpet, Eric immediately went up to them. After greeting them, he ignored the media, who became even more excited because of Buffett's appearance, and led the three into the theater. P.S. Today's third update is 12,000 yuan. Star. Chapter 635. The lights in the theater dimmed. After the production and distribution company's logo, hysterical screams came from the sound system. The screen turned bright, and an underground boxing arena full of crazy people appeared in the audience's eyes. In the ring, a slender figure seemed to be struggling under the fierce attacks of a muscular female boxer with a crew cut. However, her opponent's fist did not touch the girl's body at all. With a few quick camera clips, coupled with the rapid-fire commentary of the black host holding a microphone beside the ring, the strength of the two female boxers was displayed in front of the audience. The buzz-cut female boxer's valiant figure, which did not have any feminine characteristics, was indeed strong, but the delicate girl's record of 37 consecutive victories made the audience once again fall into a frenzy. In a close-up that flashed by quickly, the girl with a sickly pale face raised her fist wrapped in white bandages to block several attacks from her opponent. She seized an opportunity and was about to fight back when a white light flashed in front of her eyes, instantly affecting her judgment. Her opponent revealed a cruel grin and suddenly attacked with his fist. The girl retreated step by step and finally hit the rough fence of the ring. As she dodged, a sudden iron wire wrapped around the fence cut an obvious bloody wound on the girl's right arm. After the girl avoided a fatal crisis by nimbly moving to the side, there was a muffled bang, and the screen cut out of the boxing arena. The door of the black Buick Boulevard was slammed shut, and the camera deliberately gave a close-up of the Buick Boulevard's Three Shields logo. Some of the audience who thought they were very knowledgeable couldn't help but smile, thinking that this scene was undoubtedly a product placement. John Bosley, the contact person played by Morgan Freeman in the original Bill Murray's role, stood beside the Buick Boulevard and listened for a moment. His sharp gaze swept across the somewhat dilapidated street. The camera switched to a first-person perspective. In John's field of vision, several young men and women appeared in the alley not far away. John's gaze seemed to stop on one of the figures, then he smiled at the tall figure on the other side and said, "Jill, come with me to meet your future partner." Charlize Theron's character, Gil Monroe, nodded as he followed Morgan Freeman towards the warehouse-like building that emitted faint noises. The two sturdy guards noticed the arrival of Hardadef and his companion. Not only did they not stop them, they even opened the iron gate for them in a fawning manner. Passing through the dark tunnel, John brought Jill to the stands on the second floor. A bald white man noticed John's arrival and came over to greet him. He whispered a few words in his ear. However, Jill had already noticed the two people who were fighting in the ring below the spectator stand. The black-haired girl, who seemed to have been suppressed a moment ago, now had the absolute upper hand. The fierce attacks of the white fist shadows gradually made the buzz-cut female boxer lose the ability to resist. "That was fast," Jill exclaimed in surprise. John was already standing beside Jill at some point in time. His expression was somewhat solemn as he said, "She's angry." Before she could finish her sentence, the buzz-cut female boxer had already been kicked to the ground by the black-haired girl with a fierce whip kick. There was a burst of fanatical cheers in the venue. John's expression didn't change as he said to Jill, "Let's go." The two figures disappeared at the top of the stairs. The scene rotated and cleverly switched to outside the venue again. A Latino girl wearing a halter top and ripped jeans walked out from the group of young men and women that John had been watching at the entrance of the alley. She had a lollipop in her mouth. The girl giggled and gestured her middle finger at the young men and women. Then, she casually walked toward John's Buick. Walking near the Buick Boulevard, the Latino girl took out the lollipop in her mouth. There was no trace of candy on the tip. Instead, there was a trace of metallic light. Many veteran movie fans in the theater saw this scene and couldn't help but smile knowingly. They all knew that the Latino girl played by Penelope was a car thief, but at the same time, they also realized that the Buick Boulevard was more like a bait. As a movie adapted from a TV series, most of the audience had already confirmed the identities of the three girls. At the same time, they were also more curious about the identities of the three angels. Kate and Penelope's character skills had already been revealed, but Jill, played by Charlie, had yet to show any special skills. All the scenes had only been shot for a little over 2 minutes, but most of the audience had already begun to be brought into the story. This was the effect that the producers wanted. When the car thief played by Penelope put the tool into the keyhole of the car door, the scene returned to the underground boxing arena. The pale-faced black-haired girl sat alone on the empty bench in the lounge. She quietly wrapped a bandage around her injured right arm. John and Jill stood at the door for a while. John took the initiative to walk forward and sit beside the black-haired girl. Jill stood by the door with some admiration and awe. "You only want to win every time, but they don't mind killing you," John sighed silently. There was a hint of admonishment in his tone. "Because I know they can't kill me. That's why I only want to win," the black-haired girl replied calmly. Her tone was very calm, without the slightest bit of arrogance or conceit. It was as if she was just stating an established fact. "It was just an accident. Bernie will take care of it. However, I still suggest that you don't come here anymore." There are too many people who don't follow the rules these days. The black-haired girl had no intention of agreeing. She silently wrapped the bandage around her arm and glanced at Jill at the door. John had no intention of continuing to dissuade her. He gestured to Jill and said, "Your new partner, Jill Monroe. Jill, this is Selena Garrett." Selena glanced at Jill and ignored the girl's greeting. She continued to ask, "Aren't there two?" John smiled and said, "The other one is outside. Let's go." Penelope Cruz's character, Lucaine Baker, had already realized that she was in trouble. As usual, she only took a few seconds to open the car door. However, after a few minutes, not only did she not find the fuse, but the door was also mysteriously locked. Like a bird that had fallen into a trap, Lucaine struggled for a while. Just as she was about to find something to smash the window of the Buick Boulevard to escape, the door to the front passenger seat was pulled open. A kind-looking black uncle smiled at her and said, "I specially chose your favorite car. How do you feel?" Lucaine opened her mouth wide in surprise. She was stunned for a second before her expression turned innocent. She waved her arms and said, Haha, good evening, sir. I came in to say hello. I didn't expect there to be no one in the car. Ha ha. Following the girl's cute quibble, everyone in the theater burst into laughter. However, when John threw a thick stack of documents into Lucaine's arms, the theater burst into laughter again. This was because the stack of documents were all photos taken of Lucaine when she was stealing cars. What was even more hilarious was that the cars that Lucaine had stolen all had Buick's eye-catching 3 Shields logo on them without exception. Looks like Buick has definitely paid a lot of money this time. However, this kind of implantation is really interesting, many film critics in the audience thought. On the screen, Lucaine was like a flustered and talkative little magpie. She kept quibbling and even confidently accused John of secretly taking photos of her. The other 2 girls watched the scene quietly. John said to Lucaine slowly, "I'll give you 30 minutes to drive the car to Malibu 10880. Otherwise, I'll hand you and these photos over to the police for investigation." The talkative little magpie, immediately quieted down. The roar of the engine could be heard. The Buick Linden drove forward for more than 10 meters before it made a clean drift and drove onto the main road. Lucinai's voice could be heard from the Buick Linden that was shuttling through the traffic like a fish. "Will you let me go if you drive to Malibu 10880? I'll leave you with a private job. No, I don't want to be sentenced to 180 years like my dad. If you want me to open the safe, I'd rather be handed over to the police. We guarantee the legality of the operation. You're the FBI? No. CIA? No. Me 6? No. Don't tell me it's KGB. A few impatient voices could be heard at the same time. Shut up. As the Buick Linden drove further and further away, the explosive rock music started to play. The official opening once again gave the audience a big surprise. Eric used the opening style of the David Vinci version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo in his memory. Seeing the male sculptures wrapped in a strange black liquid being slowly smashed one by one, many filmmakers and audiences could not help but think of the naked woman in the 007 film. A strong feminist style, tit for tat with the 007 series. A female film critic at the scene was so excited that she quickly wrote this sentence on her notepad. She could not help but mutter to herself, "I'm really looking forward to it. I wonder how much of the 007 series can this film reach?" Although there were some small Easter eggs waiting to be discovered in the opening minutes, Eric did not continue to delve into the actual plot. It was somewhat similar to the original plot. The core code of the latest online email service developed by Knox Network Technology was stolen. Once the core code was used, it would pose a threat to the information security of tens of millions of users. At the same time, the person in charge of the development of the code, Eric Knox, was also kidnapped. The three angels received the mission to rescue Eric Knox and retrieve the core code. There was no doubt that Eric's setting was to promote Yahoo's online email service. This was because Yahoo was the only online email service provider on the internet. Even if the name was changed, everyone knew which company the Knox Network Company was referring to. When the script was first discussed with the several people in charge of Yahoo, because of the theft of the core code, Ian Neer and the others were worried that the users would believe it. However, after Steve Mitnick read Eric's script, he even said to Eric in a mocking tone, "That's ridiculous. Let's film it." Eric did not mind this technical maniac's mockery. After all, it was just a movie. Of course, Eric knew some things. The core code of the online email service had tens of millions of lines. It was definitely not something that one person could write. Furthermore, the core code was stored in a secret server cluster that only a few of Yahoo's core executives had access to. Even if the person in charge was really kidnapped, in Steve Mitnick's words, to move the server cluster with Yahoo's core code, they would need at least a few container trucks. The premise was that the kidnappers would have to accurately locate the servers in Yahoo's huge data center. However, in Eric's setting, the core code was only stored on a 2.5-inch floppy disk. Wasn't that ridiculous? After the movie was released, Yahoo would release a few articles to explain the situation, and it would easily resolve the users' concerns. Of course, a professional like Steve Mitnick would definitely find such a setting ridiculous, but in the mid-90s, where many ordinary people hadn't even come into contact with personal computers, such a setting wouldn't arouse too many people's doubts. Instead, it gave people a sense of technological sophistication. Selena, the girl without three, who was both sickly and strong, Jill, the computer genius, and Lucaini, who was cute and talkative but had the ability to unlock all locks, worked together more and more tacitly in the process of the missions that were full of surprises. The great villain scheme was also slowly unraveled. A movie that saved the world would always end up in the villain's secret base, and Thunderbolt was no exception. In a secret base deep in the Nevada desert, the angels who had fought their way into the villain's headquarters were having their final battle. Not long after the battle began, Lucine, who had helped her partner break through the base's gate, was accidentally separated. There was no time to worry. Selena and Jill ran into a swarm of enemies. Selena defeated all the brawny NPCs and, as usual, took down the talkative villains. Finally, she and Jill arrived at the central control room covered in wounds. Jill's index finger flew across the keyboard. Soon, she looked at a computer screen and said worriedly, "The virus program has been activated. It will be released in 10 minutes. The only thing we can do now is to inform everyone to cut off the internet to prevent the world's large amount of computer data from being destroyed." Selena asked, "Can't we stop it?" "The virus program has been encrypted. This kind of encryption can only be cracked by an exhaustive method. Based on the computing speed of the computers here, it will take 190 years to crack the code, but we only have 10 minutes. After a pause, Jill continued, "Unless we have a supercomputer, then we might only need a few minutes to crack the code." Author's note, 9:00 star. Chapter 636. Selena recalled a small detail that happened when the three of them participated in Nox Network. She said, "Didn't you say that you could remotely control Nox Network's data processing center and turn it into a supercomputer?" A trace of uncertainty flashed across Jill's eyes as she said, "In theory, yes, but I've never done it before. Also, Nox Network's data processing center isn't big enough. I need the world's largest data processing center." Selena glanced at the phone in the control room and said, "Do your best. I'll inform John and ask him to release the news." Jill nodded. Her gaze lingered on the Yahoo browser icon on the computer screen for a while. She took a deep breath and opened a program's interface. Then, this genius girl, who had not been too eye-catching compared to the other two girls in the movie, finally showed her valiant side. Her 10 fingers, which had turned into afterimages, danced on the keyboard in a frenzy. Strings of program codes appeared on the screen like flowing water. In order to show the visual impact of this scene as much as possible, Eric did not use different shots to stagger the operator's typing actions and the computer screen shots. Instead, he used a close-up shot to film Charlie's entire operation and the computer screen. Eric believed that this scene would be enough to make all the geeky young men and women in the world mesmerized. After all, there were always computer geniuses with crazy hand speed, but most of them only existed in legends. How many people had actually seen such a person? In order to prepare for this short scene, Charlie had practiced her hand speed for half a year. Moreover, in order to achieve a more shocking and perfect effect, she had filmed this scene for a week. Obviously, the effect was clear. After this scene appeared on the screen, Eric, who was in the theater, could clearly hear many people exclaiming in amazement. A young man sitting not far away from him even lost his composure and shouted, "That's so cool!" The countdown timer on the screen was ticking away. A few minutes later, Jill, who was sweating profusely, finally pressed the confirm button in relief. The sci-fi data transmission scene flashed by. What appeared in front of the audience was a square metal and steel frame building next to a lake. The square building was covered with water cooling pipes and had a striking Yahoo logo. The camera cut into the interior of Yahoo's data center without stopping at all. It passed through the dense cluster of servers with flashing blue indicator lights and stopped in the control room of the data center. The white engineer, who had been listening to music, inadvertently glanced at the temperature control screen of the data center. When he saw the rapidly rising temperature curve that had reached the red line, he immediately got up in a panic and staggered out of the control room. Then, the engineer standing in the server hall was stunned. He did not even realize that his earphones had fallen to the ground. In the Panoramic's panorama, because millions of CPU computing cores were operating at full capacity, all water and air cooling systems in the data center had automatically started. Along with the sharp high temperature alarm, a terrifying roar as if the end of the world was approaching, the end, the world, the water cooling and air. In the remote desert base in Nevada, Jill glanced at the countdown that only had 1 minute and 22 seconds left. He murmured, "Faster, faster, faster." Finally, in the last 30 seconds of the countdown, a 32-digit password finally appeared on the interface that was rapidly flowing with data. Without hesitation, Jill quickly opened the virus control program and entered the long password in one go. Then, he decisively pressed the stop button. Phew! Eric could almost hear the relieved voices of everyone in the theater. A wicked smile appeared on his face. There was no one around the two angels. How could the heroes who saved the world hear the cheers of victory? Sure enough, It was not over yet. However, after the virus self-activation program was stopped, just as Selena and Jill relaxed, a cold and rigid electronic synthetic female voice immediately rang out. Warning, the base self-destruct program has been activated. 59, 58, 57. The two girls looked at each other and did not even have the chance to curse. They rushed out of the corridor like crazy. 30, 29, 28. When they reached the open space outside the base building, the haunting synthetic female voice was still ringing around them. If the base self-destructed, half a minute would not be enough for the two of them to safely escape the intense shock wave of the explosion. Before they could show any despair, a black Buick Boulevard rushed to the two girls. Lucaine, who had scars on her face and messy hair, shouted, "Get in." 10, 9, 8, 7. The black Buick Boulevard had just rushed out of the base less than 20 meters when a terrifying explosion rang out. A huge cloud of fire formed behind the Buick Boulevard. The intense shock wave of the explosion still enveloped the Buick Boulevard, and all the windows were shattered. However, the three girls who had curled up in advance and were protected by the body of the car were finally safe. After the explosion, the Buick Boulevard, which had lost all its windows, started up again. After a few bumps, the speed became more and more stable. In the end, it drove onto an endless desert road. Lucini's cute voice rang out again in a timely manner. "My dad said that one who survives a great disaster is bound to have good fortune. He has already gone to prison to enjoy a lifetime of leave. I heard that he has become a boss and is living a very good life. We have done such a big thing. Should we take a vacation too?" Of course. Definitely not L.A. prison. Selena was still expressionless, but she did not ignore Lucini's nagging like before. Instead, she simply said, "Boring." Jill, who was leaning against the back seat, also said, "Not interested. I just want to find a place to have a good sleep." Lucaine was immediately displeased. "Hey, after so many things, I thought we had become friends." Selena simply turned her head and looked out the window. Jill's thin lips curled up slightly. "I don't make friends with stupid thieves who only know how to steal Buicks. Don't you think the Three Shields logo of Buick is cool? Besides, I occasionally steal Chevrolets." This time, the other two girls simply did not answer. Lucaine, who was once again ignored, was unwilling to let it go. "Let's talk about the vacation. How about Hawaii? Maldives? Mediterranean? Don't tell me you want to go to the Caribbean." An impatient voice rang out again at the same time. "Shut up." On the desert road, the shade of the Buick, which was gradually moving away, suddenly jolted, as if expressing its dissatisfaction with a certain chatterbox. The music gradually rang out, and the scene quickly froze on the empty desert road. After the subtitles slowly appeared, there was immediately a buzz of whispers in the theater. It was only because this was a special premiere that they did not immediately get up. However, there were also many viewers with keen intuition who continued to quietly watch the screen. Sure enough, when the last line of subtitles appeared, before the scene changed, Lucini's hilarious nagging had already rung out. "I want a vacation, a real vacation. Hawaii's sunshine, beaches, handsome guys, oh, and coconuts. I love coconut juice the most. But what the hell is this place? Hey, don't you think we should change to a more generous boss? At least he can be generous enough to let us see his true colors." The scene lit up, and three white figures wrapped in furry hiking suits appeared on a snowy mountain. They finally climbed to the edge of the cliff at the top of the mountain. The three girls were immediately attracted by the scene of flames soaring into the sky in a building similar to a military base on the opposite side of the cliff. They could faintly hear rapid gunshots. Lucaine stopped complaining and was dazed for a moment before she said, "It's so lively. It's a pity that we can't go over and say hello." As she spoke, on the runway of the opposite base, a propeller plane rushed out of the cliff and fell straight to the bottom of the valley. Another black figure, who was originally riding a motorcycle, also fell down. Selena suddenly said, "We're on the same boat." Lucaine stuck her head out and looked down. As she didn't dare get too close to the edge of the cliff that was covered in snow, She didn't notice the propeller plane and the person who fell off the cliff. Poor guy. But my dad once said that if the person who fell off the cliff can survive, he'll definitely be able to find the treasure at the bottom of the valley. Should we go down and see if he's dead? If he's not dead, Selena can kill him, and we can go find the treasure that originally belonged to him. Jill, who was standing on the far left, narrowed her naturally languid eyes and stared at the opposite side as if she was calculating something. After listening to Lucenai's nagging, she said, "I bet that he should have died in the propeller plane." As soon as she said that, a loud buzzing sound quickly came from afar. In the flying snow, the propeller plane that had just fallen miraculously rushed out of the cliff and into the sky again. Lucenai's eyes widened. She looked up with the other two girls and said, "I also bet that he should be alive in the propeller plane." The screen went black, and the movie ended. The lights in the screening room came on. Many of the audience were still immersed in the suspense caused by Lucenai's last sentence. After a few seconds, there was sporadic applause in the screening room, but then the applause quickly became continuous. "It was a great movie," Buffett, who was sitting next to Eric, nodded with a smile and said to Eric, "but there were a lot of things I didn't understand. It seems that I'm really old." "I'm very willing to answer any questions you have," Eric said with a smile. "But let's talk about today's theme." Buffett nodded. Obviously, what Eric was about to talk about was more interesting to him than the plot of the movie. Without participating in the final curtain call, Eric, Buffett, Chris, Katzenberg, Michael Lynn, and the female assistant left the theater silently and gathered in a high-end coffee shop. At this time, Eric didn't hide anymore and directly revealed his purpose. After hearing this, Buffett frowned and said, "You want Marvel Entertainment in Ronald Pullman's hands?" Eric nodded. "I know that Marvel is now in a mess. But even so, if Firefly takes the initiative to buy it, not only will Ronald Pullman ask for an exorbitant price, but it may also cause a fight among other film companies." Tom Murphy also asked, "Eric, is it for the copyright of those comic characters?" Eric nodded. "Yes, Ronald Pullman's actions this time gave me a very good hint. But if Firefly does it alone, it will be too obvious and will definitely arouse Marvel's vigilance. Everyone has their own companies, so I hope to get your help to take down Marvel Entertainment." Although in Buffett's view, Marvel, which had been losing money for years and was heavily in debt, was almost worthless, he still asked patiently, "Eric, tell me about your plan first." "Of course." Eric nodded, and told them about the plan that he had thought through in detail. The total value of the entire Marvel Entertainment at this time was less than $500 million, but after Eric told them about his plan and said that some of the copyright of Marvel's characters had the box office potential of Warner's Batman, everyone said that they would do their best to cooperate with Eric's subsequent plan. An ingenious popcorn movie. The three heroines completely get rid of the fixed vase image of women in Hollywood movies with their own outstanding acting skills, and give the audience a visual feast that is a combination of feeling and strength. The next day, a famous film critic in the Los Angeles Times gave Thunderbolt such a high evaluation and gave the movie 5 stars, which was rare. The reason given by the critic, who rarely gave full marks, was that Thunderbolt was the first very successful all-female action movie in Hollywood history. Almost at the same time, the plot, foreshadowing, and Easter eggs in Thunderbolt all became the focus of the media's heated discussion. The media made all kinds of speculations about why the female lead, Selena, appeared in the underground boxing ring, the meaning of the conversation between Selena and John at the beginning, the father that Lucy often mentioned, and her hobby of stealing Buick cars. They also hoped that the production company could reveal these small details in the sequel. Of course, there were praises and discussions, but at the same time, there were also doubts. On the day Thunderbolt was released, as the CEO of Oracle, Larry Ellison, who had the title of Madman, jumped out and publicly criticized Eric for the super mistakes in the movie. Larry Ellison said that the world's largest data processing center should be Oracle's data center in Washington state. However, as soon as Larry Ellison said this, Oracle's old rival, Microsoft, was immediately dissatisfied. Microsoft's spokesperson immediately said that Microsoft's data center was the largest. Then, IBM, Sun, and other companies jumped out one after another. It was very lively for a while. While several high-tech companies were arguing about whose data center was the largest, a few days later, the well-known Hollywood Reporter quickly stirred up another wave of discussion with an article called "The Real Identity of Charlie." Chapter 637. While Thunderbolt is giving fans a visual feast of hot pink, it also leaves us with many interesting hidden details. We can also see a character and world setting that is completely different from the TV series. It's conceivable that this is a foreshadowing by the ambitious producers for the sequel. While fans of the James Bond series are discussing whether the black figure flying the propeller plane at the end of the movie is the new James Bond, while gossip magazines are debating whether Penelope Cruz's character, Lucini Baker, has an daddy complex, while geeky youths are busy studying the real and complex exhaustive algorithm at the end of the movie, perhaps many people have overlooked a very hidden detail. 3 minutes into the movie, the contact, John, played by Morgan Freeman, blackmails Lucini by saying in a seemingly casual manner, "I'll give you 30 minutes to drive to 10880 Malibu, or I'll hand you over to the police along with these photos." After watching the entire movie, we didn't see any more details about Malibu 10880. The movie also didn't explain why John asked Lucini to drive the Buick to Malibu 10880. After some investigation, we found that Malibu doesn't have an apartment number 10880 in real life. So, this very abrupt conversation at first glance seems to be a completely useless redundant plot. But is that really the case? As we all know, the plot of Thunderbolt is very strict. The producers are even more meticulous in the details. Even the program code that the genius girl, Jill Monroe, entered at the end of the movie is said to be written by Yahoo's CTO, Steve Mitnick. Then, according to this train of thought, in the most important opening stage of the movie, it is absolutely impossible for there to be a meaningless conversation. After many investigations by the magazine's reporters, we finally found the true face of Malibu 10880. Perhaps many readers have already noticed the eye-catching seashell villa photo in the illustration of this article and made related guesses. That's right, the so-called Malibu 10880 is Eric Williams' luxurious private manor in Malibu. According to the clues provided by many insiders, although the apartment number of the Pointy Corner Manor is not 10880, Eric Williams has referred to the Pointy Corner Manor as 10,880 more than once. Moreover, we found the most direct evidence. In a project document of the architectural design company in charge of the Pointy Corner Manor project, the code of the Freedom City Villa project is 10,880. For the time being, let's not discuss why Selina Gatler, played by Kate Beckinsale, allowed herself to indulge in the cruel and fatal fights in the underground boxing ring, nor do we want to find out what happened to Selina and her former partner. These behind-the-scenes stories are likely to appear in the prequel or the plot of the movie. Back to the movie, after the formation of the new Angel Group, the first thing the three angels had to do was naturally to meet their boss. Although this mysterious boss did not reveal his true face, according to this logic, John's purpose of getting Lucini to drive to the fictional 10880 was explained. At the very least, in this movie, the identity of the owner of 10,880 is undoubtedly hinting at the boss of the detective company, Charlie Townsend, who did not appear in the entire movie. And according to the existence of 10,880 in the real world, it's not difficult for us to discover that the ubiquitous Charlie Townsend in the movie is undoubtedly Eric Williams' incarnation in Thunderbolt. Perhaps as the screenwriter of the movie version of Thunderbolt, Eric Williams set up this little plot on a whim, but when we turn our attention to today's Hollywood, many people will be surprised to find that the young boy who made a name for himself with Home Alone 6 years ago is now like the ubiquitous Charlie Townsend in Thunderbolt. His influence has spread across half of Hollywood, and this influence is even more vivid in this year's summer movies. Starting from the end of May, all the box office successes such as Saving Private Ryan, True Lies, The Lion King, and Thunderbolt. Whether or not they are produced and distributed by Firefly Group, they more or less carry the personal imprint of Eric Williams. And the upcoming Dumb and Melon 2 and Men in Black are also from Eric Williams. The personal influence of this new Hollywood mogul has already covered 4 of the 7 major film companies: Firefly, MGM, Columbia, and Fox. This terrifying influence is almost beyond any movie mogul in Hollywood's century-old history. Because this miraculous young mogul is currently less than 25 years old, it's not difficult for us to make a hypothesis that perhaps one day in the future, Eric Williams will completely unify Hollywood and become the veritable king of Hollywood. Eric put the article that had just appeared 2 days ago and had already been reprinted by many newspapers on his desk. He shook his head and smiled, then continued to read other information. After a week of screening, Thunderbolt had easily won more than $49 million at the box office. Although this box office could not be compared to the first week of films such as The Mummy and Saving Private Ryan, the hot topic of this female action blockbuster was far more popular than the few popular films of the previous month. The reason why the box office of Thunderbolt was low was not because the popularity of the summer had passed, and it was definitely not because of factors such as the film's scheduling or the film's quality. Just like how Buffett said that he did not understand some of the plot of the premiere, it was because the movie involved a lot of high-tech plots that the elderly and children could not understand. Thunderbolt did not attract audiences of all ages, but it was because of these cool high-tech plots that the main audience of the movie was mainly teenagers between the ages of 14 and 28, and it had an extraordinary impact on this group of people. Moreover, due to the high reputation and popularity of the movie, the box office of Thunderbolt compared to the first week, the box office of Thunderbolt. Instead, the box office of the second week of Thunderbolt. Box office statistics agencies predicted that the box office of Thunderbolt could easily exceed $50 million in 2 weeks. Thunderbolt was also very popular in some of the overseas box office markets that were released at the same time as North America, especially in Japan where it was released at the same time. As a country where manga was popular among the people, Selena's manga-esque image in the movie made a lot of Japanese manga otakus excited. The box office of the movie in Japan was even close to that of North America, reaching $46 million. Soon after, Selena's real-life figurines were sold out in Japan along with the Thunderbolt Beauties series that were sold out. In just a week, the originally unknown Kate became the most popular Western female celebrity in Japan, and a lot of offers for collaborations and endorsements were sent to ICM. Thanks to the outstanding results of Thunderbolt, MGM was finally able to escape from the cliff of bankruptcy. The European investors who were expecting huge returns were also overjoyed. After the box office of Thunderbolt, both parties could not wait to contact Eric, hoping to start preparing for the sequel as soon as possible. At the same time, 2 other companies that had nothing to do with the movie industry also gained unexpected benefits. Within a week of the movie's release, Yahoo's online email users increased by 1 million due to the movie's strong advertising campaign. These users were basically new and valuable internet users. The daily number of visitors to Yahoo's portal also increased significantly in a short period of time. On July 1st, YCR, the instant messaging software officially launched by Yahoo Incorporated, reached a terrifying exponential growth rate. Riding on the momentum of Thunderbolt Charming Baby, the number of users of this trendy and avant-garde long-distance messaging software in this era exceeded 10 million within a week. Although they had made ample preparations beforehand, this time, Yahoo was still unable to withstand the huge data flow pressure brought about by the skyrocketing number of YCR users. On the evening of July 5th, there was a temporary server outage. Although it was inevitable that several high-tech giants who were vying for the title of the world's largest data processing center would mock them, it did not dampen the users' enthusiasm. The other company that benefited was, without a doubt, Buick Automobile Company. Buick, which was originally focused on business models and was not very popular among young people, had more than doubled its sales within a week of the release of Thunderbolt. Other than the Buick Boulevard that appeared many times in the movie, the sales of several other models under Buick increased significantly. With the influence of Thunderbolt, Buick not only opened up the young consumer market that had been stagnant for a long time, but it was also expected that the sales of cars in the second half of 1994 would increase by at least 30%. It was worth mentioning that Buick was different from Lamborghini and Ferrari, which could only sell a few thousand units a year. This mid-range brand under the General Motors Group had already sold more than 1 million units worldwide in the 1980s, with annual sales reaching tens of billions of US dollars. Therefore, one could imagine how much extra profit Buick would gain from a 30% increase in sales. Back then, Buick only reluctantly forked out $5 million for the implantation fee because of the line in the movie, "Don't you think Buick's Three Shields logo is cool?" However, after the movie was released, the president of Buick immediately contacted MGM, who was in charge of the movie's distribution, and said that he would add an additional $20 million for joint promotion with the movie. In the past, only the 007 series could enjoy this kind of treatment. Buick's competitors, Ford, Chevrolet, and even Japan's Toyota, Honda, and other car brands also contacted the producers, trying to get the exclusive brand implantation rights for the sequel of Thunderbolt. The sound of the office door being knocked on woke Eric up from his reading. He answered and the door was gently pushed open. Eric looked at the female assistant in a professional suit coming in. He smiled and waved the copy of Hollywood Reporter that he had just read and asked with a smile, "Kelly, do you think I can unify Hollywood?" From the perspective of the anti-monopoly law, it's impossible. Kelly held a stack of documents and sat down opposite Eric. She said, "But from the perspective of a miracle, it's not necessarily true." Eric said, "I can tell that your words are definitely praising me, not using me as a target like this article, right?" Kelly showed a feminine and intellectual smile and said, "Yes, but this article also helped Firefly a lot." According to the finance department's estimation, because of the merger with ABC, the group's financial report for the first half of the year needs to be delayed until the beginning of next month. The appearance of this article has played the same role as the beautiful financial report. The impact caused by the reform of the hand-drawn animation department is now minimal. All the sales of long-term bonds are expected to be completed before the end of the month. Eric asked, "Speaking of this, is there any movement from Peter Schneider and Roy Disney?" "I'm here to tell you about this." Kelly handed a document in her hand to Eric and said, "This is their condition." Eric flipped open the document and skimmed through it. In addition to a series of expected requests such as a substantial increase in the salary of the hand-drawn animation department and the department's budget, Peter Schneider and Roy Disney also requested for the construction of a Disney animation campus comparable to Pixar's, and for them to enjoy the same rights as Pixar's. Eric closed the document and said with a faint sneer on his face, "They want to double the employees' salary as soon as they open their mouths. They have no intention of letting this matter end immediately." Kelly replied, "Since they've chosen to go against Ron Perelman will also need enough time to unite the creditors. It just so happens that we also need enough time to make arrangements," Eric suddenly said with a smile. "This is their last contribution to Firefly." Kelly felt a little sad for Peter Schneider and Roy Disney, especially Peter Schneider. This high-level animation department executive was actually quite capable. If the department was reformed according to Eric's plan, he might have a chance to get a higher position in Firefly in the future. But now, even if the hand-drawn animation department found a new owner, once his betrayal today was exposed, he would definitely be kicked out by the new owner. Firefly absolutely had no obligation to hide this matter for Peter Schneider. P.S. Still 2 updates, the next one will be late. Star. Chapter 638. Mr. Katzenberg has personally operated a private equity fund under the group to start your plan. Hathaway, State Street Global, and Firefly Investments are also following up. If we don't want to be noticed by Marvel, we will need about a month. Kelly handed over the next document and said, "Also, several newspaper groups have made a second round of offers for our paper assets. The current highest bid is $1.4 billion from Condé Nast." Eric quickly read the document in his hand and said, "Let Jeffrey start the acquisition negotiations. Yahoo Network and AOL both need a lot of money. Tell Jeffrey that he doesn't need to haggle too much over the price. As long as the price reaches the estimated $1.5 billion, it will be fine. But I want the buyer to pay in cash as soon as possible." Kelly nodded and wrote it down on the memo. Then she looked up and said, "That's all for serious business." Eric looked at the closed office door and joked, "Do you want to do something indecent here?" Kelly rolled her eyes at him and handed the last document to Eric. She said, "This is from Miss Murdoch. The New York Post was going to publish it tomorrow, but she stopped it. She said you can deal with it yourself. She can stop the New York Post's report, but she can't control other newspapers. In addition, there is a copy of the file related to this news manuscript. Eric looked at the title of the news manuscript, The Dark Past of a Genius Girl. His eyes suddenly narrowed. When he saw Charlie's name in the article, Eric could almost guess the general content. After reading the article roughly, Eric confirmed his judgment. In the original Spacetime, Charlie was nominated for the Best Actress Oscar for The Female Devil. In the subsequent media public relations war, the news that Charlie's biological father was shot to death by her mother when she was 15 years old was once again hyped up by the media. Charlie, who was originally a simple victim, was even forced to use the word patricide by the unscrupulous media. Eric did not pay much attention to that. His own result was that Charlie still won the Best Actress Oscar. Now, perhaps it was because Fox's Dumb and Melon 2 was about to be released, but the box office momentum of Thunderbolt Charming Baby did not show any signs of weakening. The New York Post dug up this news from somewhere, so they had the same idea as the media in his previous life. However, perhaps they were taking Firefly's side into consideration, so the article did not deliberately distort the facts like in the original Spacetime. However, the tendentious hints between the lines would still make people daydream. Since this matter has been dug up by the media, it definitely can't be hidden. Eric thought for a while, then tore off a piece of sticky paper and wrote a line of words. He handed it to Kelly and said, "Talk to ICM personally. Also, ask the Public Relations Department to cooperate as much as possible. Follow this guideline and guide the Public Relations Department. I don't want to see any messy news appearing." Kelly took the note from Eric and saw the words, "A regrettable family tragedy, a strong girl who walked out of the shadows." She nodded and said, "MGM CEO, Frank Marcheso, doesn't know the phone number here, so he called me. He wants to arrange a time to talk to you about Thunderbolt Charming Baby. MGM hopes to release 2 sequels of Thunderbolt Charming Baby at the same time. Let them talk to Jeffrey about this. After they're done discussing." Eric was halfway through his sentence when he looked up and asked, "Did something happen?" Kelly was just about to speak when Eric suddenly said, "Oh, it must be Penny and the other 2. Kelly nodded. "The person in charge of DreamWorks wants to sign a contract with Miss Cruz and the other 3 for the next 2 sequels at once. However, Miss Michelle Simmons from ICM hasn't given a response." Eric said, "I'll help ask the 3 of them what they're thinking. Let MGM rest assured and focus on the release." In the next few days, with the cooperation of Firefly's Public Relations Department, ICM Management Company, and MGM, news about Charlie's past as a young girl began to appear in the media. However, most of the news put Charlie completely from the perspective of a victim and expressed full sympathy. At the same time, they fully publicized Charlie's experience of wandering in Hollywood alone. They completely molded the girl into an independent and self-reliant girl who walked out of the shadows successfully. The effect of the first impression of ordinary people was very strong. Since such an idea was instilled in them at the first moment, then if there were any articles slandering Charlie in the media in the future, it would only arouse the disgust of most people. At the same time, Charlie's popularity, who originally had a weaker presence in the Breakin' Charming Baby trio, had also benefited from the disaster by a large margin. In the second week of July, Fox's Dumb and Melon 2 was also officially released. However, due to the impact of the box office decline of The Lion King and Breakin' Charming Baby, Dumb and Melon 2 only grossed $33 million in the first 3 days of the first weekend, which was $4 million lower than Breakin' Charming Baby. The first week's box office was expected to stop at $45 million. However, compared to Breakin' Charming Baby, which cost more than $80 million, the biggest cost of this vulgar comedy was only Jim Carrey's salary. The total production budget was less than $40 million. Therefore, Fox still made a lot of money from this film. After returning to Los Angeles from Boston at the end of May, Eric went through more than a month of intense work. He checked most of the film projects that he needed to take care of personally, and his schedule gradually became more relaxed. In addition to paying attention to the layout of taking over Marvel Entertainment, he also spent more time preparing for the Victoria's Secret show. In the studio of the Victoria's Secret show, Eric had just sent away the head of Firefly's music department, who had sent a stack of singers' cassettes. The three girls, who had just returned to Los Angeles after the European and East Asian promotional tour, and Penelope's sister Monica, walked into his office together. Penelope and Kate were each holding a set of gorgeous angel wings in their hands. After greeting Eric, Penelope couldn't wait to show a set of butterfly wings behind her back. She said, "Eric, are these the angel outfits to be worn at the Victoria's Secret show? They're so beautiful." Eric smiled as he watched the two girls put on the angel wings. He said, "You must have taken them from the shelf by the door of my office. These are all waste products to be disposed of. The real angel wings that are chosen are kept in the vault." Kate asked curiously, "These are already so beautiful. The chosen ones must be even more stunning. Can we take a look?" Eric shook his head and said, "I'll give you a few tickets when the time comes. No one is allowed to see them now." Kate stuck her tongue out at Eric and said, "So stingy." Eric didn't answer. He looked at Charlie, who had been very quiet since she came in. It was obvious that she had something on her mind. He joked, "Charlie, are you planning to steal Kate's role in the sequel?" "No, of course not." Charlie hurriedly shook her head. Eric was about to continue, but when Penelope heard Eric mention the movie, she couldn't wait to gossip. She hugged Kate and said, "Eric, you don't know. When we went to Tokyo to promote the movie, a man saw Kate at the scene and cried on the spot. He even wanted to rush up the stage while crying. He scared the hell out of us." Kate pushed Penelope away unhappily and said, "What makes you think that he came for me? Maybe he wanted to pounce on you." Penelope laughed and said, "Although I didn't understand that guy's Japanese, everyone at the scene could hear the pronunciation of Selena clearly." Eric said, "I've already seen it in the newspaper. Kate is now the most popular Western actress in Japan. How do you feel?" Kate shook her head and said, "Not very good. The people from that country always give me a weird feeling. This is because of cultural differences. People from different countries and ethnicities will have this feeling when they look at outsiders. Otherwise, there wouldn't be racial discrimination." Eric explained briefly and said, "Let's not talk about this. Someone asked me to ask, what are the three of your plans for the sequel?" The three girls looked at each other and didn't speak for a while. Eric pointed at Penelope and said, "Penny, you tell them." "Eric, we don't mind making a sequel, but we don't want to rush the two sequels. If we make one a year, our roles will definitely be set." Eric remembered that MGM wanted to add the two sequels to DreamWorks' 10-film plan. The original 10-film plan was planned to be made within 3 years. After hearing Penelope's answer, Eric more or less understood. Tapping the table lightly, he thought for a while. Seeing the three girls looking at him more and more nervously, Eric suddenly smiled and said, "You have so little confidence in me. Are you worried that I'll sell you?" Although Eric was very gentle in life, when it came to movies, he was often very aggressive. The three girls were really worried that Eric would force them to make one a year. Hearing Eric's words, Kate, who was the smartest, relaxed. She laughed and said, "Who asked you to do so many bad things?" Eric smiled and said, "Looks like I need to find time to ask you to help me remember what bad things I've done." Kate was stunned. Her little brain quickly tried to recall. For a moment, she couldn't remember anything, but she still snorted unhappily. Eric didn't care and patiently explained, "You must be thinking too much. In that case, we'll change it to one every 2 years. In fact, the production plan of any film company in Hollywood is not fixed. It involves tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. The production process can't be too careful. It's normal for all kinds of changes to happen during the production. Although the original agreement was to make 10 films in 3 years, if it can't be completed in the end for various reasons, the remaining projects will either be cancelled or delayed. Take Spielberg for example. He still owes Universal a few movie contracts. It's said that they are contracts from more than 10 years ago. Maybe he'll just forget about it." Penelope rolled her eyes and asked, "Then what about our pay?" "Your pay has nothing to do with me." Eric laughed again. Although Firefly has 30% of the profits in DreamWorks, the movie's production funds are from Europe. So, just let Michelle help you negotiate. The higher you can get, the better. But don't go overboard. Be careful or we'll break up. Kate asked, "How much do you think we should ask for?" Eric thought for a while and said, "Let's package the 2 sequels at $12 million each. Don't mention the split. After all, there are 3 of you. An average of $18 million per film is already a sky-high price. The producers still have to invite other actors. The total cost of the actors' pay may be $25 million. If your asking price is too high, the producers can only reduce the shooting budget. This will definitely affect the quality of the sequels. It'll do you more harm than good." Eric said it casually, but even Charlie, who had been a little worried, couldn't help but be speechless. After all, their first film's pay was only $200,000 to $300,000 USD, and they had suffered so much. Now, their net worth had suddenly skyrocketed to tens of millions. In the past, they had never thought that they could earn so much money. After the shock, Kate quickly thought of something and said, "More than 18 million? I heard that Nicole Kidman could earn more than 30 million with just one film, The Mummy." The Mummy's box office in North America and overseas was very popular. It was estimated that in the next few years, it would bring in a net profit of nearly $400 million for Universal Pictures. It was also because of the box office explosion of The Mummy that Michael Eisner easily took back control of Universal from Michael Ovitz after his heart surgery. However, the person who benefited the most from this film was undoubtedly Nicole. That 8% contract with all channels had brought Nicole no less than $30 million. This also made her the highest paid actress in Hollywood. It was estimated that it would be difficult for anyone to surpass her in the next 10 years. Just like Jack Nicholson's super high salary in Batman, Nicole got so much this time because of an accident. Universal is probably regretting it now. They only needed to spend $10 million to hire Nicole, but now they have to pay 3 times the price. Also, Nicole will only be able to get a fixed salary if she participates in the next sequel. Penelope said, "Then we'll negotiate according to the number you gave us." Eric nodded and looked at the angel wings beside him. He smiled and said, "These look better when you wear underwear. There's a fitting room next door. Go and put them on for me to see." Kate immediately blushed and glared at Eric. Penelope picked up the wings with a smile and pulled Kate out. "Kate, let's go and try them on. They don't have to be seen by a certain guy." The 2 women had already left the office. Eric looked at Monica, who was blinking her big eyes, and pointed at the door. "You go too. Help your sister change." The little girl seemed to have realized something. She lowered her head and walked out in a hurry. After the office door closed, Eric asked Charlie, "Did something happen?" "No." Charlie shook her head. She hesitated for a while and said, "Michelle told me everything. I also saw the note you wrote. I just wanted to thank you." "Oh." Eric nodded and joked. "You know, I'm a capitalist. You made money for me, so of course I have to protect you." Charlie bit her lower lip and hesitated for a moment. Then she said, I don't want to owe you anything." Eric smiled and said, "Although I want to say that you don't owe me anything, you know, men are all vain. So, what I want to say is, if you feel that you owe me anything, just continue to owe me. Every time I think of a beautiful woman who feels that she owes me something, I feel very satisfied." Charlie finally couldn't hold it in. She laughed for the first time since she came to this office. However, the girl quickly restrained her expression and glared at Eric. She said, "Is this how you coax girls in private?" "Not necessarily. It depends on the person. Take you for example. You have to do the opposite. Using a term from the Eastern art of war, it's called loosening the reins only to grasp them better." Eric pointed outside the door with a smile and continued, speaking with assurance. "When it comes to Kate, this kind of proud little girl, you have to be a little more forceful. When it comes to Penny, you don't have to use any method." "You're such a bastard." Charlie couldn't help but laugh again. However, the girl had unknowingly moved to the door. Then, under Eric's surprised gaze, Charlie reached out and locked the office door. Then, she walked toward Eric, aggressively. Eric was about to get up in confusion, but Charlie pressed him down on the wide leather chair. Then, the girl's slender body leaned forward and she reached out to pull Eric's tie like a kitten that suddenly went crazy. However, the panic hidden in the girl's expression completely betrayed her. Eric was about to say something when Charlie pulled off the tie and put it in front of Eric's eyes like a blindfold. Then, she kissed him clumsily with her cold, thin lips. When the thin lips that were trembling because of nervousness left him, Eric subconsciously joked, "Charlie, you have to know that in America, some crimes aren't just targeted at men." However, as soon as he said this, Eric suddenly felt a hard bite on his shoulder. The man gasped. The girl's voice trembled slightly, but she still said with hatred, "Who told you to deliberately ignore me?" "My queen, this is the office. Why don't we talk at home?" "Don't worry, I definitely won't let you off." "Shut up, don't move." Star. Chapter 639. Charlie opened her eyes and realized that she was lying on the sofa with a blanket covering her body. The sky outside the window was obviously dark. Only a desk lamp was lit in this simple office separated by a partition. The figure behind the desk was quietly flipping through something with his head lowered. Thinking of her crazy actions in the afternoon, Charlie secretly pulled the blanket over her body, wanting to cover her burning face. "You're awake." Eric's sudden voice startled Charlize. After a long while, the girl murmured, "Yes." Looking at Charlie's flustered appearance as she instantly pulled the blanket over her head, Eric smiled gently and considerately did not mention what happened in the afternoon. He said, "It's almost 8 o'clock now. If you plan to spend the night here, the two of us can only squeeze on the sofa." "I'm not." Charlie subconsciously wanted to refute, but the moment the words left her mouth, she quickly changed the topic. "Have Kate and the rest left?" "They left a long time ago," Eric said as he got up and turned on the office lights. He walked to Charlie's side and said, "Get up, I've already booked a restaurant. Let's go have dinner together." The bright light of the fluorescent lights made Charlie subconsciously squint her eyes. Looking at the figure of the man beside her, a strong sense of embarrassment arose in her heart again. She said, "You go out, I want to put on my clothes." "Okay, Your Majesty." Eric could not help but tease her. He placed Charlie's clothes on the coffee table beside the sofa, turned around, and walked out of the office. Charlie stared at the door. After a while, she stretched out her right arm from under the blanket and tried to reach for the clothes beside her. However, just as she stretched out her arm, Charlie saw a tie that she used to commit a crime a few hours ago appear on her wrist. Some crazy and confusing images rushed into her mind. Charlie hurriedly retracted her arm and quickly took off the tie on her wrist. Because of her crazy actions in the afternoon, Charlie was very reserved at the beginning of dinner. However, under Eric's patient livening up the atmosphere, Charlie quickly relaxed. When the two of them left the restaurant, Charlie even plucked up the courage to take the initiative to hold Eric's arm. The dinner venue was Venice Beach. After dinner, it was almost 11 o'clock, but the pedestrian street near the sea was still very lively. Ever since the release of Breakin', the three girls had become the focus of the paparazzi. However, Charlie's whereabouts that night were out of everyone's expectations. Coupled with Eric's bodyguard's skillful anti-stalking methods, the two left the restaurant after dinner and simply covered themselves with a baseball cap. Coupled with the dim light at night, they didn't encounter any harassment even after walking for a long distance on the pedestrian street. After accompanying Charlie for a while, Eric looked at his watch and said to the girl, "I'll send you back. It's late." Charlie's footsteps faltered as he mumbled, "I don't want to go back tonight." Charlie was still living with Kate. Eric could guess why she was unwilling to go back. He smiled and said, "Then come to my place." Charlie shook her head and said, I don't want to go to your place either. In any case, I won't go to your place." Recalling Charlie's strong personality in his previous life, Eric could understand why she rejected him. Looking around, Eric pointed at a cinema and said, "Then I'll treat you to a movie. How about Breakin'? It's very popular recently." Charlie, who was a little nervous, was amused by Eric's tone and said, "Who would watch their own movie?" Eric smiled and said, "Me? I always watch my own movies many times. Aren't I narcissistic? You're clearly working. By the way," Eric suddenly knocked his forehead and said, "I almost forgot that I acted in another movie. I don't know if I can buy tickets in this theater. There don't seem to be many midnight shows in Columbia." Noticing Charlie's confusion, Eric explained, "Men in Black. You know about it, right? It's the premiere today, but I didn't go. The midnight show should have started by now." Charlie was stunned. She tightened her grip on Eric's arm and asked in a low voice, "You didn't go to the premiere because you were waiting for me?" "Yeah, aren't you very touched? In your dreams." Charlie pinched Eric lightly and said, "We're even now. I won't be grateful to you." Eric had a hurt expression as he held his chest and said, "Her Majesty is really heartless." "Don't call me that again." Charlie pinched harder but quickly let go of Eric. She walked towards the cinema and said, "I'll buy the tickets. It's my treat." Although it was a little late, Eric and Charlie were lucky enough to get tickets for the midnight show of Men in Black. Eric had adopted the setting of the Zerg invasion in the original Men in Black. The two male leads were still Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. In addition, Eric had given the important role of the female forensic doctor to Catherine Zeta-Jones, whom he had not seen for a long time. This beautiful Welsh woman's temperament was very similar to that of the original Linda Fiorentino. Of course, Eric had the idea of keeping the goodies within the family. Like everyone else in the cinema, Charlie was quickly immersed in the novel setting and the comedic performances of the characters. However, half an hour later, Charlie remembered Eric's words and asked, "Didn't you say that you also acted in a role? Why haven't I seen you yet?" Eric smiled mischievously and said, "You'll see it in 5 minutes." Charlie saw that Eric did not answer, so she turned to the screen again. In the plot, because Jay learned that there were aliens everywhere around him, his worldview was completely refreshed. He sat on a bench by the Manhattan River for a night. Although he did not have the noble ideal of protecting the world because of a little girl's innocent smile, he finally decided to join the Men in Black. Then he was taken to the secret headquarters of the Men in Black by Kay. After a mysterious sphere caused a commotion in the hall of the Men in Black's headquarters, Kay took Jay to the alien monitoring room in the headquarters. Then, after the big screen monitoring the aliens appeared, everyone in the cinema laughed. Charlie, who had a smile on her face, finally understood what Eric meant when she said that she also acted in a role in the movie. Just like the original version, the aliens that appeared on the big screen were all public figures that Americans were familiar with, such as Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and so on. Of course, Eric would definitely not be able to escape. Also, in the original, Jay's conversation about his childhood teacher was completely changed. On the screen, Kay said, "Everyone on the screen is an alien. In public, they act normal, but in private. Well, you must already know." Jay stared at the big screen and exclaimed, "Oh my God." Kay said, "Very surprised, right?" No, it's very reasonable." Jay pointed to a corner of the screen and said seriously, "I never thought that Eric Williams was from Earth. Look at what he has done over the years. It's crazy." Kay explained, "Eric Williams is from Pandora. 6 years ago, his spaceship accidentally crashed on Earth. In order to raise enough money to repair the spaceship, he used his racial talent to become a movie director." Jay said with a look of realization, "Spaceship, I know. It must be in Malibu. I've always felt that the Shell Villa looked like a spaceship." Kay nodded and said, "That's right, Malibu 10880. As soon as Agent K said this in the movie, there was a burst of laughter in the theater. After all, because of the article in The Hollywood Reporter that was widely reprinted recently, the number 10,880 was deeply ingrained in people's minds. But the teasing did not end there. Following Kay's explanation, Eric's close-up appeared on the big screen. In the picture, Eric was basically no different from an ordinary person, but there were two comedic sky blue antennae on his head. Moreover, at this time, the Pandoran Eric was angrily holding up a tax collection notice and roaring at the other two men in black in front of him. "I have a green card, I'm a law-abiding citizen, I've already paid 35% of my personal income tax. Why should I pay this damn alien immigration tax? Are aliens not human? You're discriminating, racial discrimination. I have a dream." Just as Eric was about to imitate Martin Luther King and give a speech, one of the men in black in the surveillance camera completely lost his patience and punched Eric in the nose. Eric fell back. Then, Agent J nodded enviously and said with certainty, "If the men in black can beat up Eric Williams, I'll join." After the teasing ended, like the other audiences in the theater, Charlie had already collapsed on Eric. Eric gently patted Charlie's back and said, "You don't have to be so dramatic." "Haha, Eric, are you really an alien?" Charlie sat up with the help of Eric's arm and continued to ask with a smile. Eric moved closer to Charlie's ear and said, "Didn't you check it yourself this afternoon?" Charlie's face blushed and spat, but she still curiously reached out her little hand and touched Eric's head, as if looking for traces of the two antennae. Eric smiled and slapped Charlie's curious little hand away and said, "Don't look for it, I put the antennae at home. If you want to see it, you can come with me to Malibu 10880. Haha. P.S. Next update will be later." Chapter 640. While Men in Black raked in US $76 million at the box office in the first week, the black super SWAT in the film also caused a trend of imitation throughout society just like in his previous life. In the following period, the popularity of black clothes and sunglasses was like the trench coat and toothpicks of Bro Ma after the release of Heroes on the Other Side of the Ocean. Although the release time was in the hot summer, it was still difficult to stop the enthusiasm of fans wearing black clothes and sunglasses on the streets. Since then, a proprietary term, black super mask, gradually became popular in the media. At the same time, the movie also caused a new round of discussion about aliens in the media because of the ubiquitous extraterrestrial ridicule of characters and events in reality. And the first to bear the brunt, the hottest topic of discussion was, without a doubt, Eric, the Pandoran. After all, Eric started from scratch as an ordinary high school student and became a media tycoon with tens of billions of dollars in just 6 years. This kind of miraculous life experience was unprecedented in the entire history of mankind. Countless media outlets then began to dig into Eric's characteristics that matched the characteristics of aliens. Even Eric's more fickle character became evidence of an alien's attempt at racial invasion in the tabloids. Some people even sent a request to the White House to investigate Eric's alien identity. There was also no lack of people who used Eric's wealth at this time to ask the federal government to levy an alien immigration management tax on Eric. Of course, these requests would not receive any response. In the end, even the always serious New York Times could not help but publish an article on the important page to join in the fun. Eric Williams satisfied the gossip lovers of the universe with a brilliant and crazy self-ridicule. A famous film critic on Buffett's Washington Post also used a line in the movie to tease, "If I can see Eric Williams get beaten up, I'm willing to pay $4. What was more interesting was that after Men in Black's peripheral products began to be sold, the most popular product was not the cool weapon models, nor the variety of alien figurines, but the pair of sky blue antennae on Eric's head in less than 30 seconds of the shot. In addition to a large number of fans buying them for collection or wearing them to parties, even some parents like to buy a pair of sky blue antennae as a gift for their children, perhaps because they wanted their children to be as good as Eric. However, after the box office explosion of Men in Black, a series of problems about the sequel also came. Although Sony Columbia Pictures had made a name for itself by releasing several films with Firefly in the past 2 years, under the wasteful management of Peter Guber, the company was still in a state of loss year after year. Originally, Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Broken Arrow were 2 projects from Firefly, so they didn't cause much of a stir in terms of profit distribution. However, the success of Men in Black clearly surpassed Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Broken Arrow, and the profits from the sequel were undoubtedly more lucrative. Therefore, the 40-60 split between Columbia and Firefly caught the attention of Sony. This was because the film copyright of Men in Black originally belonged to Columbia Pictures. However, after cooperating with Firefly, Columbia not only lost most of the profits that they should have enjoyed alone, but they also lost 60% of the copyright. Most importantly, according to the original agreement, if the sequel development was delayed for a long time, Columbia would even lose the remaining 40% of the copyright. If the sequel development went smoothly, it would not be a big deal. Since they chose to sign the contract, Sony could only continue to cooperate with Firefly. But after the success of Men in Black, including the film director, the two male leads, the producer, and even the original comic company of Men in Black, jumped out one after another, trying to get a share of the profits in the sequel. In the face of this situation, Firefly would certainly not compromise. If the profit sharing could not be reached, at most, everyone would just drag it out. Firefly was not afraid of a lawsuit. Anyway, Firefly's film company did not lack popular film projects. Firefly's main release schedule was even 3 years later, but Columbia Pictures could not afford to drag it out. After Sony bought this company, not only did they not get a single cent of profit, but they also did not promote their own video format. With the arrival of the DVD era, if Columbia continued to lose money, this film company would definitely become more and more useless. Moreover, Sony gradually realized that something was wrong. However, the Japanese did not immediately fall out with Firefly, but the Sony executives began to put pressure on Peter Guber, trying to get Peter Guber to fight for the benefits that Columbia deserved. Peter Guber himself also had a premonition that he would not be able to sit in this position for long. Of course, he also knew how bad Columbia was. After the cooperation with Firefly ended, it was impossible to continue to stay in this position. However, because there were still 2 blockbusters, Game of the Brave and Mission Impossible, to be released in the second half of the year, although Peter Guber himself had reaped enough benefits in the past few years, he still hoped that after the 2 films were released at the end of the year, according to the bonus contract signed at the beginning of the year, he would get the last huge bonus with the success of these 2 films before leaving Columbia. So, in just a few days, Peter Guber almost pestered several senior executives of Firefly, and even found Eric, who had been in the Victoria's Secret show recently. Looking at the busy crowd around him, especially the slim models trying on clothes, Peter Guber, who was standing next to a workbench, did not forget to chatter to Eric. "Eric, how about this? We can sign a subsidiary agreement, including the director and the 2 lead actors of Men in Black. Only after the sequel's profits reach a certain level can they get a bonus. We can raise this standard. In this way, if the sequel is a big success again, even if we give more benefits to the main creators, we will still make a profit." Eric continued to show the designer a set of angel clothes, completely ignoring Peter Guber, and said, "Peter, you should know how high the pay in Hollywood has risen. Sony is rich and doesn't care about this, but we, the natives of Hollywood, have to look at the long term, right?" Chapter 641. Eric, of course I know that the salary of stars is a bit too high, but I recently heard that Firefly Pictures has just launched James Cameron's new film, Titanic. The production budget of this film is $150 million. Since Firefly can budget $150 million for such a high-risk disaster film, why aren't they willing to make some concessions for the sequel of Men in Black? Even if we meet the requirements of the main creators now, the final production budget will not exceed $150 million. Eric looked at Peter Guber and said, "Peter, let's not talk about Men in Black for now. Do you know why I'm willing to let James overspend again and again?" Peter Guber shrugged. Eric did not expect Peter Guber to answer, so he said, "Because I'm very sure that every cent James spends is to make the film as good as possible, and not to spend a lot of money to invite stars who are overpaid." Peter Guber tried to refute, "But aren't we inviting stars to make the film more appealing at the box office?" "Of course, I don't deny that," Eric said. "But most of the time, it's not worth it. Take Beverly Detective 3 and Law Enforcement, for example. Paramount and Warner Brothers spent a large amount of their budget on the remuneration of the protagonists. Eddie Murphy and Kevin Costner not only received a fixed remuneration of more than $15 million at the same time, but they also enjoyed a very high profit-sharing agreement. But the result, you must have seen it for yourself." Peter Guber said, "Eric, this is just an accident, and Miss Kidman's salary from The Mummy is even more shocking." Nicole completely gave up the fixed salary to get the corresponding profit-sharing agreement. "If The Mummy fails at the box office, Nicole won't get a single cent," Eric said. "And James, every time he overspends, he will take the initiative to give up his director's salary to reduce the budget burden of the film company. But those stars, not only do they get a high salary of tens of millions of US dollars, but they also ask for more profit sharing. But they enjoy so many benefits, but they will not take any risks for the film company. Just like the two films I just mentioned, they brought huge losses to the film company, but the two lead actors received more than 10 million US dollars. I don't care how much other film companies offer to rope in those stars, but for Firefly and the film companies associated with Firefly, they will never think of such a good thing in the future." Peter Guber saw that Eric was unwilling to make concessions on the salary, so he had to say, "In this case, Eric, about the copyright distribution agreement, I think it is necessary for Firefly and Columbia to renegotiate. You know, the copyright of Men in Black was fully owned by Columbia at the beginning. If the sequel development is blocked, it will automatically belong to Firefly after 5 years. This agreement is too unfair to Columbia." At the beginning, Eric had drawn up the agreement based on the Marvel Comics character license that returned automatically after 5 years without a sequel. After hearing Peter Guber's entanglement, he finally said the purpose of his trip. Eric simply waved his hand to let the people around him leave. He leaned against the workbench and looked at Peter Guber with a smile. He said, "Peter, everyone knows that this is an unfair agreement from the beginning. The Japanese must know it, too. What's more, what everyone did in private is even more unfair. But since the Japanese want to enter Hollywood, they should be aware of the tuition fees." "But, Eric..." Eric waved his hand and interrupted Peter Guber. He still had a smile on his face as he said, "I know that you were chased out of Katzenberg's office yesterday. You must think that I have a better temper than Jeffrey Katzenberg. At the very least, I won't chase you out of the office like Jeffrey. However, just because I have a good temper doesn't mean that I'm easy to talk to. There's no room for negotiation on this matter. As for your reason, it is not valid at all. The copyright of Men in Black and the copyright of Game of the Brave, which was released at the end of the year, have been bought by Columbia for many years, but they did not do anything. Every film company has similar film and television rights. Without Firefly, maybe these two films would not have waited until the day of shooting. After all, it was Firefly that gave them enough commercial value. Compared to Sony, we should be on the same side. The Japanese do not understand some things, but we are very clear about how much you have taken from Columbia in the past few years. So, enough is enough. I think what you should do next is to wipe out some traces and not give the Japanese a chance to find fault." When Peter Guber heard Eric's straightforward words, his old face turned red, but he could not think of any words to refute. Noticing the change in Peter Guber's expression, Eric did not want to embarrass the leader of Columbia like Katzenberg. After all, Peter Guber had contributed a lot to Firefly's successful signing of the unequal treaty with Columbia. After thinking about it, Eric said, "How about this? I will let Firefly do some negotiations, and I will publicly support you in the media. At least before next year, Sony will not take the risk of kicking you out. I think you will not continue to stay in Columbia next year, right?" Peter Guber nodded immediately. In fact, he wanted such a guarantee. As for the interests of the Japanese, he really did not care at all. Since he got a personal promise from Eric, Peter Guber did not dwell on the matter just now. He said, "Eric, tonight's celebration party for Men in Black will be attended by many people. Why don't you come?" Eric shook his head and said, "I have something important to do tonight. Forget it this time." Peter Guber left Firefly Studios with satisfaction, but Eric was still thinking about Men in Black. In the original space-time, compared to other popular Hollywood movies, the Men in Black series was the most ill-fated. The interval between the production of the trilogy was 15 years. And whether it was the reputation or the box office, each movie was worse than the previous, but the production budget had increased exponentially. Similar to the Mission Impossible series, most of the profits from the Men in Black series were shared by Will Smith and other main creators. Relatively speaking, Sony Pictures only made a small amount of money. The reason for this situation was mainly because Sony's film business was not doing well. Among the major film companies, Sony's performance was at the bottom most years, which also caused its weak position in front of the A-list superstars. Paramount could still argue with Tom Cruise after the box office failure of Mission Impossible 3, but Sony Pictures did not have the ability to maintain a decent operation. They could only use the strategy of high pay to attract stars and projects. In the original Spacetime, Hollywood's first $20 million salary was given to Jim Carrey by Sony Columbia. Compared to Sony Columbia, Firefly did not have any concerns in this regard. If the salary for Men in Black could not be negotiated, Eric would rather put the project on hold for a long time. After all, he had a lot of projects with higher profit margins waiting to be developed, and he did not have to compromise like Sony. Thinking of this, Eric could not help but look forward to the next battle with Marvel. As long as Marvel, whose superhero copyrights were still in a state of disarray, was snatched, even if there was nothing else, Firefly could maintain its strong position in Hollywood for the next 20 years or even longer. Men in Black was the last film related to Firefly Group during the summer of 1994. After the release of this movie, more than half of the summer was over. While other major film companies were still releasing a few films one after another at the end of the summer, Firefly had already begun to count the gains of this popular summer. At the end of July, Firefly's finance department produced the preliminary financial report for the first half of 1994. Although there was a brief period of chaos caused by the ABC merger in the first half of the year, Firefly Group's revenue for the first half of the year after the merger still reached $7.3 billion. However, because of the compensation expenses caused by the restructuring of the department and the layoffs, the group's net interest rate dropped slightly to only 9%. The group had achieved a total net profit of $657 million in the first 6 months. This figure did not exceed the group's internal expectations and was even higher than the data of most Wall Street analysts. At the same time, after intense bidding and negotiations, the famous Condé Nast Group in North America finally decided to buy the paper media assets of Firefly at a price of $1.52 billion. Stimulated by a series of good news such as the summer box office, the $8 billion bonds issued by Firefly Pictures for the acquisition of ABC were sold out on July 20th. After that, all kinds of people inside and outside Firefly who had their own plans started to become restless. First of all, with the excellent box office of $215 million in 5 weeks of The Lion King, the head of Disney's animation department, Peter Schneider and Roy Disney, who had been waiting for the right time, jumped out as pawns and began to confidently fight for the interests of the Disney Animation Department's employees who had been oppressed for a long time. The layout of Marvel Entertainment was still in the final stage, and Ron Perlman was still hiding in the dark. In order to show his importance to Disney's Animation Department, Eric was very cooperative and personally came forward to discuss the conditions with Peter Schneider and Roy Disney. Eric deliberately did not mention the abolition of Disney's hand-drawn animation department, but obviously did not want to compromise quickly. He successfully conveyed some wrong signals to some people. Chapter 642. It had just entered August. While Eric was still pretending to negotiate with Peter Schneider, the topic of Firefly's closure of the hand-drawn animation department, which had cooled down after the heated discussion at the end of June, suddenly became a hot topic again. For a time, news such as Eric Williams and the senior management of Disney's animation department clashing, Disney's animation department employees are dissatisfied with the company's treatment and will leave, The Lion King will be Disney's last 2D animation, and so on appeared in the newspapers one after another. This was because the expected total profit of The Lion King was more than $1 billion. For a production cost of less than $50 million, the return on investment was an astonishing 2,000%, which far exceeded the profit margin of other live-action films released during the summer. Therefore, if Firefly was a listed company, even with the support of many blockbuster films released during the summer, the news that Disney's animation department might collapse would inevitably cause a sharp drop in their stock price. Under such a powerful media attack, soon, all the bystanders who received the relevant news through different media had the idea that Firefly was about to lose Disney's hand-drawn animation department. The organizations and media that closely followed this matter speculated that other forces other than Disney's animation department were pressuring Firefly Group in this way. In their view, in the face of the huge profits of The Lion King, Firefly would never easily give up on Disney's animation department. However, at the same time, it was impossible for Disney's animation department to have such a wide media influence. After all, Disney's animation was a subsidiary of Firefly Group's subsidiary. Its original media resources were basically in the hands of the parent company. It was impossible for them to make such a big move alone. Moreover, compared to the media's relentless pressure, Firefly Group's response to this series of news seemed to be a little weak. Most of the analysis organizations came to the conclusion that Firefly would be forced to yield to Disney's animation department. On the second Monday of August, Ron Perlman, the chairman of Andrew Holdings, headquartered in Manhattan, New York, issued a public statement in his capacity as a creditor of Firefly Pictures, along with 27 other creditors who held long-term bonds of Firefly, expressing concern about the internal turmoil caused by a series of wrong decisions made by Firefly's board of directors and senior management. At the same time, in order to protect the interests of the creditors, Ron Perlman publicly appealed to Firefly shareholders, hoping to enter Firefly's board of directors as a creditor and participate in Firefly's decision-making and management. If Firefly's board of directors rejected this request, Ron Perlman said that he would submit it to the Federal Securities and Exchange Commission for arbitration. Immediately afterward, Peter Schneider of Los Angeles and Roy Disney, an important member of the Disney family, almost simultaneously issued a statement on behalf of all the employees of Disney's animation department, expressing strong disappointment with Firefly's series of group decisions. At the same time, they also welcomed Firefly's creditors to participate in the group's operations and hoped that Firefly's shareholders would carefully consider this matter. In order to prevent the news from leaking in advance, Ron Perlman and his 27 joint creditors only held a total of 3.6 billion Firefly bonds, less than half of Firefly's total bonds. When Ron Perlman issued the statement, all the media and organizations that closely followed the storm in early August instantly understood the ins and outs of the matter. Ron Perlman also issued a call to Firefly's other creditors at the press conference. However, when the other creditors were still considering the pros and cons, Peter Schneider and Roy Disney's statements of support made them instantly decide to side with Ron Perlman. In the Firefly meeting, Eric looked at the latest information in front of him and said in a sarcastic tone, "They formed a creditor alliance in just 3 days. That's really fast. I'm just a little curious. How do the 77 creditors want to allocate the 2 board seats that they want?" Katzenberg looked at Buffett and the other directors in the room and said, "Eric, I think you're completely complicating this matter. We don't need to go through such a crisis. Although we're an unlisted company, if we fall out with the creditors, it will have a great negative impact on Firefly's future financing. Everyone must think the same, right?" Eric looked at the others and smiled. "Actually, I'm doing this to let others see what's about to happen as a revenge action. I want Marvel Entertainment more urgently than any of you think. Now, I don't need to hide this goal from everyone. In the future, everyone will realize that in order to get Marvel, it's definitely worth it to start this farce that won't have any substantial impact on Firefly." Although Marvel Entertainment was a listed company, it was similar to MGM's shareholding model. Most of Marvel Entertainment's shares were also controlled by Ron Perlman's Drew Holdings. If he wanted to get Marvel, it was impossible to absorb Marvel Entertainment's shares through public channels. The only way was to publicly launch an acquisition of Marvel Entertainment. If other companies did this, Ron Perlman would definitely decisively abandon this mess that was burdened with a large amount of debt and years of losses. In the original space-time, even Michael Jackson almost became a potential buyer of Marvel Entertainment. However, only Firefly could not do so because Firefly's current performance was too eye-catching. Once Firefly made a public acquisition offer, it would be the same as telling others that they had their eyes on the copyrights of certain characters in Marvel Entertainment. Come and fight with them. The result could be imagined. It was conceivable that when competitors joined in the bidding to raise the acquisition price of Marvel Entertainment, a shrewd businessman like Ron Perlman would definitely not let go of this opportunity. Once he was sure that Firefly was determined to get their hands on Marvel Entertainment, Ron Perlman would definitely take the opportunity to demand an exorbitant price. At that time, Firefly might once again welcome an individual shareholder with a sizable shareholding. Looking at the mess that Marvel Entertainment was in, such a shareholder was definitely not something that any company would want to see. Inspired by Ron Perlman's attempt to enter Firefly's board of directors as a creditor, after more than a month of secret deployment, Eric was sure that the bargaining chips in their hands were definitely enough to make Ron Perlman obediently give up Marvel Entertainment. There was no other way. Since no one has any objections, Eric finished his speech and saw that no one in the conference room said anything, so he continued, "Then, let's start discussing how to end this farce." Chapter 643. Hello everyone, this is CNN Instant Entertainment News. Since the end of June, due to the success of the 2D animated film, The Lion King, Disney's animation department and its parent company, Firefly Group, have had a huge disagreement on the development strategy of animated films. Since then, the dispute has shown signs of intensifying. This Monday, the Firefly Creditors Alliance, initiated by the famous Wall Street investor Ron Perlman, suddenly put pressure on Firefly's board of directors, demanding 2 creditor-director seats on the board of directors. The request of the Firefly Creditors Alliance was quickly supported by Disney's animation department. The head of Disney's animation department, Peter Schneider, said that the inclusion of creditor directors could better supervise the management and operations of Firefly Group, preventing major shareholders from acting arbitrarily and unscrupulously, harming the common interests of the minority shareholders, creditors, and tens of thousands of employees of Firefly Group. A small cocktail party was being held in a mansion in Beverly Hills. Ron Perlman, Roy Disney, and Peter Schneider attended the cocktail party with other guests. They were swirling wine glasses in their hands and watching the CNN news on the TV, which was placed in the open field, with great interest. They seemed to be waiting for something. On the TV screen, after the host summarized the news, he continued, "After The Lion King broke the box office record for American animated films last week, Firefly's spokesperson publicly announced that they would be holding a grand celebration party for The Lion King at the Sunset Tower Hotel in Hollywood today." The industry generally speculated that this party represented Firefly Group's beginning to compromise with Disney's animation department. However, this afternoon, all the employees of Disney's animation department issued a statement in the Los Angeles Evening News. In order to support Firefly's creditor alliance entering Firefly's board of directors, all the employees of Disney's animation department will refuse to participate in this party. It's currently 19:15 Western Time. For the specific situation, please look at our reporter's live report from Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. The TV screen cut to Los Angeles at dusk. The CNN reporter standing in front of the Sunset Tower Hotel with a microphone in hand said, "Hello host, hello audience. We can see that the Sunset Tower Hotel, which should be bustling with noise and excitement, is actually no different from before. 15 minutes ago, a Firefly spokesperson announced an emergency cancellation of tonight's Lion King celebration party. However, before 7 o'clock, Eric Williams, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and other senior executives of Firefly still appeared in the parking lot of the Sunset Tower Hotel one after another. We speculate that this is a last-ditch effort by the senior executives of Firefly, but obviously, this effort ended in failure. So far, we have not seen any senior executives or employees of Disney's animation department appear at the Sunset Tower Hotel. Looking at the deserted Sunset Tower Hotel on the TV screen, Peter Schneider suddenly felt a little worried about whether he had gone too far. He was not worried about offending Eric. Even if he left Firefly, he felt that he could find another company. However, the current situation did not seem to be beneficial to his own interests. Roy Disney, who noticed the change in Peter Schneider's expression, patted him on the shoulder and said, "Peter, think about how Eric Williams has treated us in the past 2 years. Moreover, as long as Ron and the others get 2 board seats, and Disney Animation continues to make profits, we don't have to worry about anything." Ron Perlman, who was still smiling like a Maitreya Buddha, also said, "Don't worry, Peter. As long as we get 2 board seats, then the number of directors who are not under Eric Williams' influence will reach as many as 5. We can also take the opportunity to cultivate our own influence within Firefly. At that time, even if Eric Williams has absolute control of Firefly, he won't dare to do anything extreme and risk upheaval in Firefly. Peter Schneider nodded in relief. Roy Disney then raised the goblet in his hand and said, "Then, for our common goal, I suggest that we all raise our glasses together." Most of the people who attended this small reception were representatives of Firefly's creditors. When they heard Roy Disney's words, they were about to echo his words. However, the TV screen that was still broadcasting the news suddenly changed. On the screen, the various media reporters who were originally scattered around the Sunset Tower Hotel suddenly rushed to the entrance of the Sunset Tower Hotel as if they had felt the pull of a magnet. Among the group of reporters, Eric's figure quickly appeared in the shaky live broadcast of CNN. On the screen, Eric was expressionlessly protected in the middle by his bodyguards. After waiting for the surrounding reporters to quiet down, Eric stared at the camera lens closely, as if he was staring at someone in front of the TV. He said in a gloomy tone, "In that case, tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning, Firefly will hold a press conference. Those who are popular and those who are not are welcome to come together." After saying this, Eric hurriedly got into his car under the protection of his bodyguards. In front of the TV, a group of people who were about to raise their glasses to celebrate looked at each other. Even the experienced Roy Disney had a bad feeling in his heart. As a member of the Disney family, which meant a lot to Disney, Roy Disney had met Eric many times. In his impression, Eric had always been far calmer than his peers. However, no matter how precocious he was, Roy Disney still had to admit that Eric was just a young man who was less than 25 years old. If Eric impulsively decided to fight to the death, he was likely to lose everything. Because of this anxiety, Roy Disney did not rest well for the rest of the night. Early the next morning, Roy Disney got up and turned on the TV. He patiently waited until 9 o'clock. CNN's news channel showed the scene of Firefly's press conference hall on time. At present, Firefly Group already holds 17% of Marvel Entertainment's debt. As an important creditor of Marvel Entertainment, we found that Marvel Entertainment's operating loss in the first half of 1994 had exceeded $24 million. Moreover, Marvel Entertainment's stock price has continued to fall. Compared to Marvel Entertainment's total debt of $553 million, Marvel Entertainment, whose stock market value is less than $300 million, has shown serious insolvency. According to federal company law, at the same time as this statement, Firefly Group will file a lawsuit in the New York District Court where Marvel Entertainment is located, requesting that Marvel Entertainment be subject to compulsory bankruptcy protection immediately. At the same time, we found that a huge amount of debt financing for the company's development was illegally embezzled by Marvel Entertainment's parent company, Andrew Holdings. This serious violation of bond trading laws directly led to Marvel Entertainment's current predicament of being on the verge of bankruptcy. Therefore, Firefly Group will file a lawsuit in accordance with the law. We are determined to make Andrew Holdings pay the price for its illegal behavior. Roy Disney patiently listened to Katzenberg's speech on the TV. After worrying all night, he suddenly relaxed. This statement did not mention Disney's animation department at all, which meant that Firefly's management did not intend to fight to the death. However, Roy Disney immediately had doubts about the purpose of this statement. He could tell that this should be Firefly's revenge for Ron Perlman's actions, but he did not understand many of the details. So, he picked up the phone and dialed the number of his private lawyer. After the private lawyer's explanation, Roy Disney finally understood. According to American company law, when a company was seriously insolvent and continued to lose money, the creditors had the right to request mandatory bankruptcy protection for the company. Bankruptcy protection was different from bankruptcy liquidation. Bankruptcy protection was equivalent to the creditor giving the debtor a buffer period before bankruptcy liquidation, allowing the debtor to propose relevant plans for the company's restructuring and debt repayment within a certain period of time. However, if this plan still did not work, the company would immediately face bankruptcy liquidation. The main purpose of Firefly Group's proposed mandatory bankruptcy protection for Marvel Entertainment was similar to Ron Perlman's. It was also to obtain control of Marvel as a creditor. However, unlike Ron Perlman's method, because of Marvel's insolvency, Firefly Group's request would be supported by the federal court. Once Firefly Group seized control of Marvel, and Drew Holdings' illegal use of Marvel's debt financing would also become an important weakness for Firefly Group to attack Ron Perlman. Not only would and Drew Holdings face a refund of Marvel's financing funds, but it would also face a huge fine from the Federal Securities and Exchange Commission. This was the final trump card. As a country with very strict financing regulations, illegally using hundreds of millions of dollars of financing funds would definitely face a fine of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Once the crime was proven, even an industry giant with tens of billions of dollars in assets could be severely punished by the SEC. At this time, in the mansion in Beverly Hills where the party was held last night, Ron Perlman, who was still in his pajamas, no longer had his usual calm expression. Instead, the hand holding the microphone trembled with fear and anger. After Firefly Group issued this statement, several companies, such as Berkshire Hathaway, State Street Global Fund, and Firefly Investment Company, respectively, issued similar statements as creditors. These companies held close to 90% of Marvel Entertainment's bonds. Once the New York District Court ruled that Firefly Group's request was reasonable, Ron Perlman knew that he would not even have room to maneuver between the other creditors. Avi, I want an explanation. Why didn't I know about this until now? Shouldn't I have been notified in advance of the transfer of 90% of the bond's ownership? Tell me why. After roaring angrily at Marvel CEO Avi Allard, Ron Perlman patiently listened to the other party's explanation and slammed the microphone on the table. Avi Allard's explanation to Ron Perlman was that Firefly and several other creditors had only recently submitted the relevant debt transfer statement to Marvel Entertainment. Marvel had also prepared the relevant documents at this time, but because Ron Perlman had come to Los Angeles, they had not been sent to him in time. Ron Perlman keenly noticed that there were two time differences in Avi Allard's words. Firefly and Berkshire Hathaway had used a reasonable time difference to inform Marvel Entertainment in writing within the legal period after the debt transfer took effect. Then, Marvel Entertainment's CEO, Avi Allard, had created another time difference, further delaying the time Ron Perlman received the news. Ron Perlman found that the situation he was facing seemed to be worse than he had imagined. If he guessed correctly, Avi Allard was likely to have been roped in by Firefly. If that was the case, he was likely to suffer a big setback from Marvel Entertainment. After anxiously pacing around the bedroom a few times, Ron Perlman suddenly patted his bald head. He suddenly realized that Firefly had started to plan at least a month ago. Then, he discovered two possibilities. One was that Firefly had realized that he wanted to use the Disney Animation Department incident to enter Firefly's board of directors a month ago, so they had prepared in advance to prevent him from doing so. The other possibility was that Firefly had been coveting Marvel for a long time. After issuing bonds worth more than $500 million, Marvel no longer had any value in Ron Perlman's eyes. It was just a mess that he could easily get rid of. Ron Perlman even rarely paid attention to Marvel's operations. If Firefly had the same idea, then the purpose of the other party's actions was very likely to make him retreat in the face of difficulties and stop coveting Firefly's board of directors' seat. After quickly weighing the pros and cons in his mind, Ron Perlman keenly realized that the first possibility was very low. If it was only to use Marvel's weakness to force him to stop, Firefly and Berkshire Hathaway would not have needed to absorb nearly 90% of Marvel's bonds. That was $500 million in cash. In Ron Perlman's eyes, Marvel was not even worth half of $500 million. To be honest, if someone offered $500 million, Ron Perlman felt that he would immediately give Marvel to the other party. If Firefly's purpose was the second possibility, then the $500 million would immediately be explained. The question now was, why did Firefly want Marvel, and why did they make a move at such a sensitive time? Were they not afraid that something would happen to Disney's animation department? Or did they think that Marvel was more valuable than Disney's animation department? Ron Perlman's pacing became slower and slower. Soon, he picked up the phone again, bypassed Avi Allard, and dialed the number of another person in charge of Marvel. Chapter 644. 5 years ago, Warner's Batman made a huge profit of no less than $1 billion in box office and peripheral sales at a cost of $35 million. After Ron Perlman confirmed his guess, he immediately thought that if Firefly coveted Marvel, their target must be the superhero movie rights in Marvel's hands that were comparable in popularity to DC's Batman, Superman, and other characters. Less than an hour after the call to Marvel's New York headquarters, Ron Perlman looked at the fax documents of several copyright transfer agreements in his hands and confirmed his guess. Although Firefly only directly held the insignificant Blade Warrior movie rights, and it was still in the hands of Firefly's New Line Cinema. However, since the second half of last year, Flower Pictures, which had broken away from Firefly Group, had successively obtained the rights to Batman, Fantastic Four, and Hulk from some small movie companies that owned the rights to Marvel superhero movies by transferring the rights to invest in their movies. Moreover, Flower Pictures was currently competing with some other movie companies for the rights to X-Men. This deal should have ended in the first half of last year, but because of Flower Pictures' participation, Marvel had been waiting for the right price to sell it at a higher price until now. Ron Perlman once again called Marvel's CEO, Avi Allard, as the controlling shareholder, to immediately stop the licensing of all Marvel superhero characters. After that, he began to consider the next step of his plan. Firefly Group's statement in the morning did not mention Disney's animation department and only issued a threat as a creditor of Marvel. This meant that Firefly Group had no intention of giving up on Disney's animation department. Coupled with Marvel's current situation, Ron Perlman suddenly felt that he had two important bargaining chips. These two bargaining chips could not only allow him to obtain a seat on the board of directors of Firefly Group, but could even go one step further and become a shareholder of Firefly Group. But right now, the most important thing was how to avoid the fate of bankruptcy protection that Marvel was facing. Once the New York District Court approved the bankruptcy protection request of the creditors led by Firefly Group, Marvel would face the fate of being taken over by the creditors. At that time, Marvel would be completely out of his control. As a super-capitalist player, Ron Perlman could instantly think of a series of ways to prevent Marvel from going bankrupt. But at the same time, he realized that since Firefly Group had been secretly planning for so long, there was not much time left for him. He was likely to have less than 2 weeks left. Moreover, most of the ways to prevent Marvel from going bankrupt were ultimately nothing more than one word: money. But in order to enter Firefly Group's board of directors this time, Ron Perlman used all the liquidity of and Drew Holdings to buy Firefly Group's bonds. Some of them were forcibly transferred from Revlon and other holding subsidiaries. It was impossible for him to come up with enough funds for Marvel's capital operations in a short time. Now, the original plan had become a kind of self-made shackle. If he wanted to get out of this predicament, he had to find a way to get enough external support. Ron Perlman found the list of the CEOs of the 7 major Hollywood film companies. After weighing for a moment, he eliminated Columbia, Fox, and MGM, which had close ties with Firefly. Ron Perlman called his assistant and said, "Help me make an appointment with Universal CEO Michael Eisner, Time Warner CEO Terry Semel, and Paramount CEO Shirley Lansing. ASAP. Santa Monica Airport." Eric stood next to his car and waved at a Gulfstream business jet. He watched the Gulfstream fly all the way to the sky. In addition to Warren Buffett, Tom Murphy, and David West, the business jet also had Katzenberg and Firefly's chief legal officer, Edward Lewis. These people would be rushing to New York together and use their respective connections and influence to lobby the New York District Court to approve Marvel's bankruptcy protection application in the shortest time possible. After completely revealing his plan for revenge against Marvel, Eric believed that with Ron Perlman's shrewdness, he would definitely be able to guess Firefly's desire for Marvel. However, the bargaining chips in Firefly's hands were also far beyond Ron Perlman's expectations. In addition to Marvel's CEO, Avi Allard, being roped in by Firefly, in the process of absorbing Marvel's bonds, Firefly also collected a lot of evidence that Ron Perlman had used Marvel for illegal capital operations. Firefly even knew the amount of financing funds that Ron Perlman had embezzled from Marvel through and Drew Holdings. Marvel's current long-term bonds totaled $553 million, but only $73 million had been used for Marvel's recent development. The other $470 million had all flowed into the account of and Drew Holdings. As long as they seized control of Marvel and obtained more detailed and conclusive evidence, Ron Perlman would have to pay a price far greater than the $470 million in benefits he would receive if he wanted to get out of this crisis. Watching the Gulfstream business jet disappear into the horizon, Eric withdrew his gaze and said to his female assistant, Kelly Haynes. Kelly, what do you think Ron Perlman will do next? Of course he'll protect Marvel. Kelly followed Eric into the car and continued, the most direct way is for the major shareholders to inject capital and push up Marvel's stock price. However, Ron Perlman definitely doesn't have enough liquid capital to buy Firefly's bonds. He also doesn't have enough time to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. Since this method won't work, I think he'll definitely find a way to create a very good news to prevent Marvel from being filed for bankruptcy protection. Good news. Eric leaned back in the leather seat and said, Firefly wants Marvel. Is that good news? Kelly smiled and said, of course it is. However, most people definitely don't think so. Now the media is in a mess with all the information surrounding Firefly's recent events. Before this matter is completely settled, it won't be easy to sort out all the ins and outs. Eric narrowed his eyes in relief and said, the messier it is, the better it is for us. I think the following news will definitely make the situation even more chaotic. When do you plan to have a showdown with the animation department? Eric smiled confidently and said, let's wait a little longer. Since Ron Perlman needs a piece of good news like Disney Animation will definitely come in handy. Chapter 645. In an office at the headquarters of Universal Pictures, Michael Eisner put down Variety magazine, which contained Firefly's financial report for the first half of the year, and couldn't help but feel a little emotional. Although the net profit of all the businesses of Firefly Group was only about $600 million, which was less than half of the combined profits of Firefly and ABC last year, this was already beyond everyone's expectations. Under normal circumstances, in the process of merger between two large companies, it was very common for the new company's performance to decline in a short period of time due to the turbulence caused by the integration and restructuring. However, Firefly Group passed through this turbulent period very smoothly. Michael Eisner had to admit that if he were in that position, it would be difficult for him to do better. After surviving the quadruple bypass surgery without any mishap, Michael Eisner's body was not much different from before, except for the need to maintain a vegetarian diet. Moreover, with the excellent box office results of The Mummy, after his body recovered, Michael Eisner easily returned to his position as Universal's CEO. However, now he had to face another difficult problem. Before his surgery, in order to appease the board of directors, he had personally pulled Michael Ovitz into Universal as the CEO. Thinking about how to squeeze Michael Ovitz, who had been trying to share his power, out of Universal, the office door knocked a few times. Michael Eisner came back to his senses. Thinking that he would need more effort to deal with this person next, Michael Eisner quickly pulled himself together. A bald fatty with a big smile walked into the office under the guidance of the secretary. Michael Eisner showed a warm expression and took the initiative to stand up and extend his hand to the other party. Mr. Perlman, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Mr. Eisner. After the secretary served 2 cups of coffee, Michael Eisner and Ron Perlman chatted casually for a while before asking the obvious, may I know why Mr. Perlman asked to meet me today? Ron Perlman took out a few copyright transfer contracts from his briefcase and handed them to Michael Eisner. He said, before we talk about this matter, I think Mr. Eisner should take a look at this first. Michael Eisner skimmed through the copies of the contracts and put them aside. He said, so, Marvel wants to get Universal's help to avoid bankruptcy, right? Yes, I think we can work together, Ron Perlman said. From these copyright transfer documents, it can be seen that Firefly didn't target Marvel purely for revenge this time. They must have coveted Marvel for a long time. With Eric Williams' foresight in developing movies, this also indirectly means that the superhero copyrights under Marvel are definitely much more valuable than imagined. As long as Universal can help Marvel out of this crisis, then we can become the most solid partners. In the future, we can work together to develop these superhero projects under Marvel. Michael Eisner curled his lips without batting an eyelid. He asked, so, Mr. Perlman, what does Universal need to do? Ron Perlman was stunned, but he quickly said, I only need Universal to make a gesture of buying Marvel at a high price. It's just a gesture. Universal doesn't have to pay any price at all. As long as this good news prevents Marvel from being forced into bankruptcy protection, then I will have enough time to deal with Marvel's internal affairs. Michael Eisner's sneer almost overflowed. Then, Marvel will have a deep cooperation with Universal, right? Without thinking, Ron Perlman answered firmly, "Of course." Michael Eisner finally didn't hide his sneer. He said bluntly, "Mr. Perlman, I know Marvel's predicament very well. At the same time, I know your character very well. So, we don't have to play these little tricks at all. If you want Universal's help, sure, but I need to see tangible benefits." Ron Perlman's expression became a little awkward, but he still said, "Mr. Eisner, in that case, what will it take for Universal to be willing to help Marvel? As long as Marvel transfers the movie copyrights of the popular heroes to Universal, I will agree to publicly support Marvel." "That's impossible," Ron Perlman subconsciously blurted out, but he soon realized that he had lost his composure. He hurriedly restrained his expression and said, "Mr. Eisner, this condition is a little too much." Marvel had already lost the copyrights of Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and Hulk. Based on Firefly's attitude, Ron Perlman guessed that it would be very difficult for Marvel to recover the copyrights of these three superheroes. If the copyrights of the remaining popular superheroes were transferred to Universal, Ron Perlman couldn't imagine what value Marvel would have left. Although Marvel always claimed to have thousands of superheroes under its banner, in fact, this calculation took into account all the characters that appeared in Marvel's comic system. There was a lot of exaggeration. In Marvel Comics, there were only a few dozen superheroes that the public was familiar with, and there were no more than 10 superheroes that were as popular as DC's Batman and Superman. Although Ron Perlman realized that Firefly coveted Marvel, he still felt that what Firefly really wanted was the superheroes under Marvel that had the same potential for movie adaptations as Batman and Superman, not the entire Marvel. Once he satisfied Michael Eisner's request and accidentally transferred the copyrights of the superheroes that Firefly valued to Universal, he would completely lose this bargaining chip. Michael Eisner's thoughts were actually the same as Ron Perlman's. He also didn't think that the entire Marvel was a treasure trove with great potential for movie adaptations. Therefore, from the beginning, Michael Eisner didn't have much desire to get involved in this mess. Although he really wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to obtain the copyrights of several popular Marvel heroes, Firefly had already shown such an aggressive attitude, and Ron Perlman was as shrewd as a fox. It was almost impossible for Universal to profit from this. What's more, Universal was currently negotiating with Nicole Kidman about the sequel to The Mummy. If he angered Firefly because of his involvement in this matter, Michael Eisner was worried that Eric would ask Nicole Kidman to withdraw from The Mummy series. If he messed up this lucrative project because of a target that he didn't see any prospects for, it would be a loss that outweighed the gains. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.